Chapter 22:17. In the sky, Yi Chunfeng rushed toward Nie Tian. Nie Tian reacted instantly and activated the Shrouding Sky Totem at the critical moment. The Shrouding Sky Totem was born from the first layer of the Star River. Nie Tian had not used it for a long time. Now that he used it, it was unexpectedly powerful. The heaven-shadowing totem around Nie Tian continued to fold and form a sphere of starlight that enveloped him from head to toe. Boom! Crack! The next moment, Yi Chunfeng, like a sharp awl, hit the Shrouding Sky Totem heavily. After a violent crash, there was a harsh tearing sound. Bang! A crack appeared on the Shrouding Sky Totem, instantly like a spider web, and then the whole Shrouding Sky Totem collapsed. Ha ha ha, go to hell! At the same time, Yi Chunfeng's voice sounded very harsh, resounding in the void, seeming violent and bloody. The one who is going to die is you. However, in the next moment, after the sky-covering totem collapsed, a blood-red sword shadow appeared. At the same time, a cold voice rang out. It was Nie Tian. Yi Chunfeng obviously did not expect that after the Shrouding Sky Totem was broken, Nie Tian was not injured at all, and even attacked him. Bang! Caught off guard, Yi Chunfeng was directly hit by the bloody sword shadow. With a muffled sound, his figure flew out, drawing a bloody trail in the air. At the same time, the remaining 8 dark night storms instantly weakened a lot. Nie Tian seized the opportunity and slashed out with his sword. The mighty sword's shadow fell straight down, directly chopping the 8 dark night storms into pieces. His figure also took a step forward. His entire body was covered in a blood-red color, and a violent aura continuously circulated around him, causing him to look like a god of death. The crowd saw the scene in the sky and could not help but gasp, shocked and speechless. Who would have thought that Nie Tian could still fight back in a situation where his strength was crushed? What was even more strange was that Nie Tian's sword seemed to have seriously injured Yi Chunfeng. How is this possible? Yin Xianyue stared at Nie Tian from afar, her eyes trembling and her pretty face about to stiffen. She had originally thought that Yi Chunfeng would kill Nie Tian without a doubt. She hadn't expected that Nie Tian would fight back. At this moment, Nie Tian was standing high up in the sky. His body was covered in blood, and his face was as pale as paper. However, his eyes were as bright as ever, and extremely determined. The heaven-shrouding totem had helped him block Yi Chunfeng's fatal blow, and had also given him an opportunity to fight back. It had to be said that Yi Chunfeng had been too careless. He had thought that he would be able to kill Nie Tian in one move. However, he didn't expect that Nie Tian's martial body was far stronger than he had imagined. It was precisely because of his overconfidence that he was unprepared and was hit by Nie Tian's sword in an instant. At this moment, Yi Chunfeng's figure was standing in the sky below Nie Tian. One of his arms was gone, and half of his body was dyed red with blood. Nie Tian's sword just now didn't kill him, but it had shattered one of his arms. He had never thought that Nie Tian would be able to fight back in such a desperate situation. Damn it! Suddenly Yi Chunfeng roared. He looked like a wild beast that was about to go berserk. His eyes were surging with terrifying flames. Yi Chunfeng, I've said that if you want to kill me, you have to show your true strength. At this moment, Nie Tian's body shook, and the blood on his body surged away. He regained his fierce aura and said, "Unfortunately, your strength is only SOSO. Is that so?" Yi Chunfeng was provoked. He immediately roared and said furiously, "Nie Tian, I was careless and was injured by you. But don't think that you can escape just like that. Your injuries right now are much more severe than mine. As long as I want to, I can still kill you easily." Yi Chunfeng's fighting strength was undoubtedly greatly reduced after losing one of his arms. However, Nie Tian's current state was obviously worse than his. He could clearly feel that Nie Tian's aura was very unstable, and the blood qi in his body was very restless. However, the strange thing was that the aura around Nye Tian was very terrifying. Yi Chunfeng, you are too arrogant. Who said that I want to escape? The corners of Nye Tian's mouth raised into a strange smile. He said in a cold tone, "Now, it's time for me to fight back." After saying this, his aura skyrocketed at a crazy speed, resulting in rumbling gusts of qi, resulting in a terrifying sight. How is this possible? Yi Chunfeng's eyes couldn't help but tremble when he saw this scene. He actually cried out in shock. Nye Tian had no intention of escaping. He was going to kill Yi Chunfeng. Yi Chunfeng's expression was somewhat blank, because he couldn't understand why Nye Tian's aura was clearly weakening and becoming unstable, but his aura was still soaring. This was simply too strange. However, in the next moment, something even stranger happened. Rumble! Nye Tian's energy skyrocketed as he broke through to the peak paramount god level. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly in the face of this sudden situation. Obviously, he also did not expect this. His aura was indeed weakening, but his energy was growing stronger. That was because he had just absorbed a huge amount of the Dark Night devouring power. The power of the stars was the essence of power, and could devour anything and everything. It was precisely because of this that the life aura in his body was constantly weakening, but his strength was constantly increasing. Thanks to the Dark Night devouring power, Nye Tian had broken through to the peak paramount god level. Of course, it came at a huge price. His martial body was suffering unimaginable pain, and his blood energy was seething, as though he were on the verge of burning up. Nye Tian, how can your strength? Yi Chunfeng cried out in shock when he realized that Nye Tian's strength had suddenly broken through. He couldn't finish his sentence. Yi Chunfeng, this sword is going to take your life. Nye Tianling chuckled as he endured the pain. Mouth twitching, he blurred into motion, his blood energy and sword will exploding. Rumble! The starry sky slashed downwards, and a blood-red sword shadow that was 10,000 meters long appeared. It was like a blood dragon as it crashed down towards Yi Chunfeng. My God! What's going on? When everyone saw the huge sword fall from the sky, they couldn't help letting out cries of shock. It was like a blood-red waterfall had covered half the sky. They couldn't help feeling shocked. How could Nye Tian, who had been in a disadvantageous position before, suddenly be so strong that he was going to kill Yi Chunfeng? Don't! Yi Chunfeng let out a scream when he felt the terrifying sword momentum approaching. He was so shocked that he completely forgot to resist. He just stood there motionlessly. It was a move that Nye Tian had unleashed after breaking through to the peak paramount god level, making it far more powerful than anything he had ever unleashed in the past. Chapter 22:18. Boom! The blood-red sword shadow roared like a dragon and instantly pressed down on Yi Chunfeng. Yi Chunfeng felt that the pressure around him was getting stronger and stronger. It was getting more and more terrifying. He could really feel the aura of death. He was completely scared and stood there motionless like a piece of wood. 100 meters. 50 meters. 10 meters. The blood-red sword shadow was about to fall, but at the moment of life and death, a sudden change occurred. Boom! In the void, a horrible black palm shadow fell and directly fell on the blood-red sword shadow. Boom! Crack, crack, crack. In an instant, the blood-red sword shadow suddenly shook under the impact of the black palm shadow. Then, the sword body suddenly cracked and collapsed. Chi chi chi. The terrible power directly rushed out and raged in the space. However, a giant hand fell down at this moment and grabbed Yi Chunfeng. Then, it took him away from the center of the collision where the billows of qi were rolling. Standing in the distance, Nye Tian felt the terrifying impact, which caused his whole body to tremble violently. Immediately afterwards, he was pushed back dozens of meters, almost losing his balance and falling to the ground. What a terrible palm! He stabilized his body and suddenly raised his head to look at the sky. As far as his eyes could see, there was a figure in black standing there. His black robe fluttered in the wind, his long silver hair was unruly and evil, and his handsome face was incomparably enchanting. The person who saved Yi Chunfeng and forced Nie Tian to retreat at the moment of life and death was this martial artist in black. Nie Tian's pupils shrank slightly. He immediately confirmed that the person who came should be Yi Chunfeng's brother. Because this martial artist in black looked 70% similar to Yi Chunfeng, but he was more handsome than the latter. The sudden scene made everyone's eyes narrow. Then, they all looked at the man in black in shock. This man in black had just arrived, but he blocked Nie Tian's powerful sword with one palm and forced Nie Tian to retreat. One could imagine his strength. Big brother! At this moment Yi Chunfeng realized that he was not dead. Then, he looked at the man in black and shouted in surprise. Big brother? When Yin Xie heard Yi Chunfeng's groan, her beautiful eyes flickered and she said in surprise, "He is the crown prince of the Dead Knight Empire, Yi Chunli." Yi Chunfeng was the 5th prince of the Dead Knight Empire. So, his elder brother was obviously the crown prince of the Dead Knight Empire. Yin Xianyue's guess was right. The person who came was none other than the Dead Knight Crown Prince, Yi Chunli. After confirming Yi Chunli's identity, Yin Xianyue couldn't help but gulp. He felt that his lips were a little dry. She had never imagined that the Dead Knight Crown Prince would appear here. Yi Chunli. Others might not be familiar with this name, but Yin Xie knew that this person was truly an extremely talented person. In the abandoned land, there was a proud son of heaven ranking. It was a ranking of the strength and talent of the young geniuses of the abandoned land. The prodigy roll, as the name suggested, represented the pride of the heavens. The entire prodigy roll only recorded 9 people. It was not an exaggeration to say that those who could enter the prodigy roll were absolute geniuses that were 1 in a billion. However, ordinary people didn't know about this prodigy roll. Only the true top forces knew about it. Yin Xie was known as a genius that appeared once in a million years in the Yingyue Empire, but her talent couldn't even be seen on the prodigy roll. And she knew that the Dead Knight Crown Prince, Yi Chunli, was one of the 9 prodigies. In other words, Yi Chunli's talent ranked in the top 9 in the abandoned land. There were at least tens of billions of people in the abandoned land. To be able to rank in the top 9 among so many people, one could imagine the strength of his talent. The 5th prince, Yi Chunfeng, and the 7th prince, Yi Chunxiang, were also people with top talent. However, in front of the Dead Knight Crown Prince, Yi Chunli, the 2 of them were practically trash. It was because of her understanding of Yi Chunli that Yin Xie was so surprised that the former would actually appear here. Old 5 stepped down. Right at this moment, Yi Chunli finally spoke. His eyes stared at Nie Tian, and he said indifferently, "His life is mine." His voice was very calm, and so was his gaze. It was as if he was having a casual conversation. But the more it was like this, the more it showed that Yi Chunli was an extremely terrifying person. Yi Chunfeng was stunned for a moment, and then he seemed to realize something. He said in shock, "Big brother, your strength." Yi Chunli obviously knew what Yi Chunfeng was puzzled about. He smiled faintly and said calmly, "In order to kill him, I destroyed my own martial arts foundation and lowered my strength to the late stage of the paramount god." This. Yi Chunfeng was stunned when he heard Yi Chunli's words, and he couldn't say anything for a long time. He knew that Yi Chunli was going to kill someone called Nie Tian. And he also guessed that this Nie Tian in front of him was the person Yi Chunli wanted to kill. But he never would have thought that Yi Chunli would destroy his own martial arts foundation in order to kill Nie Tian, and forcibly reduce his cultivation from the peak of the paramount god stage to the late stage of the paramount god stage. He completely couldn't understand why Yi Chunli would do this. To Yi Chunli, killing Nie Tian was absolutely a piece of cake. Why would he destroy his own martial arts foundation? On the other side, Nie Tian heard Yi Chunli's words and immediately understood. He smiled faintly and said, "Very good. Looks like you're someone who follows the rules of the game. This Yi Chunli was really ruthless. In order to kill Nie Tian, he actually destroyed his own martial arts foundation. To a martial artist, the martial arts foundation was equivalent to their martial arts talent. Once it was destroyed, not only would their cultivation base decline, even their martial arts talent would decline. A super monstrous martial artist like Yi Chunli should value martial arts talent a lot. But in order to kill Nie Tian, he actually didn't hesitate to destroy his own martial arts foundation. His ruthlessness could be seen at a glance. A person who could even make a move on himself, who else would he care about? Nie Tian looked at Yi Chunli. The latter's eyes didn't seem to change at all. They were in a state of emptiness and indifference, as if everything in the outside world didn't exist to him. Furthermore, Nie Tian even sensed an extremely terrifying sword intent from Yi Chunli's body. This kind of sword intent was sharp and cold. It was extremely terrifying. Without a doubt, Yi Chunli was a swordsman. Moreover, he was an exceptionally terrifying swordsman. You're very smart. I came here for you. Yi Chunli looked at Nie Tian with a cold expression and said, I'll give you two choices. Come with me or die. His ice-cold voice was extremely cold, as if he didn't have any emotions. Do you think that I'm someone who can be manipulated at will? Nie Tian smiled faintly. The corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile, as if he had discovered something. Since that's the case, then I'll take it as your choice. Die, Yi Chunli said coldly. As he spoke, his figure moved and actually walked toward Nie Tian step by step. With every step he took, the sword intent all over his body became a little stronger. When he arrived at a place that was less than 1,000 meters away from Nie Tian, the sword intent all over his body had already become so strong that it made one's hair stand on end. Pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. Nie Tian looked at Yi Chunli, and his pupils constricted slightly as he exclaimed in his heart. Chapter 22:19. This person's swordsmanship is so strong. Sensing the dead Knight Crown Prince Yi Chunli's swordsmanship realm, Nie Tian's gaze trembled slightly, and he couldn't help but exclaim in his heart. Yi Chunli wasn't considered old. Within the godly state, he was definitely a young martial artist. However, his swordsmanship realm had already reached the peak of the realm of integration of sword and martial arts. More importantly, he had just destroyed his martial arts foundation not long ago. In other words, before he destroyed his martial arts foundation, his swordsmanship realm was at least the legendary realm of integration of sword and martial arts, or even higher. Right now, Nie Tian didn't know what the swordsmanship realm after the legendary realm was, but he firmly believed that it wasn't the end, but a new starting point. There was no end to martial arts. Swordsmanship was just an extreme martial art, and the realm was unimaginable. After destroying his martial arts foundation, Yi Chunli was still able to maintain the peak of integration of sword and martial arts. His talent in swordsmanship could be said to be shocking. At this moment, Yi Chunli's figure had already arrived, and he was only a few hundred meters away from Nie Tian. Nie Tian felt the terrifying sword aura around Yi Chunli. It was as if there was a mountain condensed from sword while standing in front of him. The powerful aura was extremely terrifying. However, at this moment, Yi Chunli's figure suddenly froze, and a cold light was released from his eyes. He stared at Nie Tian and said, Nie Tian, I'll give you one more chance. Come with me. My master doesn't want to see a corpse. Your master? Nie Tian's entire body was surging with sword will, and he resisted Yi Chunli's sword aura. His gaze froze, and he immediately reacted. He said, If I'm not wrong, your master is Anya Minjia, right? Since you know, then you should be more sensible. Come with me, Yi Chunli replied indifferently, and his tone was extremely threatening. His master was one of the 3 legendary swordsmen, sword sage Anya Minjia. Nie Tian was no stranger to Anya Minjia. He had seen the latter fight before, and he was an existence that was close to a sage. Yi Chunli was Anya Minjia's disciple. No wonder his swordsmanship realm was so terrifying. Judging from Yi Chunli's aura, his combat ability should be similar to Xian Zongfeng's. Impossible, Nie Tianling replied coldly. At the same time, his body shook, and the sword aura around him instantly surged, forcefully pushing away Yi Chunli's sword aura pressure. Yi Chunli was forced to take a step back. His pair of cold eyes instantly became deep and murderous. He said in a deep voice, "Since you want to die, don't blame me. I will only attack once. After that, regardless of whether you live or die, I will not attack again." As soon as he finished speaking, a black longsword appeared in his hand. A layer of dark aura permeated the sword's body. Streaks of black light continuously surged like small black snakes. It was extremely strange. "I'll kill you with one sword." Yi Chunli raised the black sword in his hand slightly. After he spoke in a cold manner, he slashed down without any hesitation. His movements were simple and unadorned, but the sword will around him was terrifying. A black sword shadow appeared in the void, like a black waterfall, suddenly falling down, blasting towards Nie Tian. What a strong sword will! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. At this critical moment, he forcefully released the power of the divine demon. The blood and qi around him surged continuously, and the sword will was stimulated by the blood and qi, exploding with an extremely violent aura. Sky-devouring blood. With a low roar, Nie Tian slashed down with his sword. The blood-colored sword will condensed into a 10,000-meter-long blood-colored sword shadow. The sword shadow was surging with intense flames, and its aura was extremely violent. What a powerful duo! When everyone saw the scene in the sky, their expressions became sluggish. Even though they were standing nearly 100,000 meters away, they could still clearly feel the violent and sharp sword intent. Who would have thought that this battle would be so exciting? What shocked them even more was that Nie Tian was really too tenacious. First, he killed Yi Chenxiang, then he severely injured Yi Chenfeng. Now, he was going against Yi Chunli. It was as if there was endless power in Nie Tian's body. It was hard to imagine that a person could be so tenacious. Boom! Boom! High up in the sky, the dark sword shadow and the blood-colored sword shadow were like two terrifying giant dragons. They approached each other rapidly and were about to collide. Boom! In the next moment, the two sword shadows collided with a loud bang. A terrifying roar sounded, and the space actually stagnated, as if it had stopped in an instant. Whoosh! Immediately, a powerful sword wave that could be seen with the naked eye appeared. It surged from the center of the collision and spread in all directions. The surrounding space was impacted by the sword wave, and the air actually appeared to be in a dense state, as if it was about to burn. Chi chi chi. Immediately after, ear-piercing sounds came from high up in the sky. The two sword shadows clashed with each other like wild beasts, wanting to tear each other into pieces. Bang! However, in the next moment, the blood-colored sword shadow could not withstand it and directly collapsed. Endless blood-colored sword will raged and attacked the space. Even though Nie Tian ignited his blood and qi and erupted with a powerful sword, he was still no match for Yi Chunli's sword. Buzz! In the next moment, the dark sword shadow in the sky actually let out a strange sword cry, and then it set off a dark storm. Like a giant dragon, it forcefully pressed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian suddenly felt his chest sink, and he reacted instantly. The wings on his back shook violently, and his figure retreated for thousands of meters. At this moment, he almost used all the star power in his body. When the star soul wings spread out, they were thousands of meters long. His speed was extremely fast, but compared to the roaring sword shadow, he was still slightly slower. Bang! With a muffled sound, Nie Tian's figure was actually hit by the dark sword shadow, and he flew straight out. Like a kite with a broken string, he fell straight to the ground. Under the gaze of countless people, Nie Tion's figure drew a blood-colored trajectory in the air, and the next moment, he directly smashed onto a giant rock on the ground. Bang! The giant rock directly collapsed and turned into stone powder that flew everywhere. On the ground, a giant pit with a radius of tens of meters appeared. A blood-colored figure lay in the giant pit. It was Nie Tion. Dead, he's dead. The crowd's eyes trembled, and they stared at the blood-colored figure in the giant pit. They could no longer feel the latter's aura, and they couldn't help but gasp. Nie Tion brought them too much shock, but facing an opponent who was far stronger than him, he still couldn't turn the tide and was killed in the end. Is he really dead? In midair, a pair of beautiful eyes that kept flickering stared at Nie Tion. Her eyes were filled with ecstasy, but it seemed that she didn't believe it at all. She couldn't wait to land on the ground and check for herself. Nie Tion, I admit that you are a swordsman worthy of respect. Yichunli looked at Nie Tion coldly, and he said indifferently, but unfortunately your opponent is me. To be able to die under my drifting abyss is your honor. His calm voice was filled with insufferably arrogant arrogance. As one of the 9 sky prides, Yichunli indeed had the right to be arrogant. The black longsword in his hand was his sword of primordial spirit, drifting abyss. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that among the young martial artists in the entire abandoned land, there were very few people who could make Yichunli use drifting abyss. Drifting abyss is indeed terrifying. However, in the instant Yichunli's voice landed, a weak voice rang out from the ground. Chapter 22:20. A weak voice sounded in Yichunli's ears. However, it was like a thunderclap that exploded in Yichunli's ears. It actually caused his calm face to reveal an expression of surprise. Yichunli's eyes trembled as he looked at the bloody figure in disbelief. He simply could not believe his eyes. Nie Tion actually did not die. Nie Tion stood up again. How is this possible? Yichunli's eyes suddenly shrank as he exclaimed in his heart. He was extremely shocked. He clearly sensed that Nie Tion was no longer breathing. How could the latter still stand up again? Moreover, the sword just now was extremely powerful. Even a mountain range would be destroyed directly. The sword's shadow landed directly on Nie Tion's flesh and blood body. The latter actually did not die. This was too terrifying. How strong was Nie Tion's martial physique? Was it still a flesh and blood body? Everyone present was shocked and their eyes trembled. The scene fell into a dead silence of disbelief. Nie Tion's figure stood in the giant pit. His body was covered in blood and his breath was extremely weak. However, his eyes were still extremely bright like stars. The sword just now dealt a great blow to him. At this moment, the 9 vital meridians in Nie Tion's body had already been torn apart. Even his fiend god embryo had been attacked. However, at the last moment, the princess's tear activated the princess's protection, which saved Nie Tion's life. Cher, your princess's tear saved my life again. Nie Tion laughed bitterly in his heart. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. There was not a trace of fear on his face. Oh my God! He's still alive! At this moment, the crowd finally reacted and shouted in shock. They looked at Nie Tion with fear as if they had seen a ghost. Who would have thought that Nie Tion would actually be alive after being hit by the dark sword shadow? This was too terrifying. Nie Tion's martial physique was so abnormal that it made people's hair stand on end. How could you still be alive? At this moment, Yichunli spoke coldly. His eyes were surging with killing intent. Looks like you're very surprised. Nie Tion smiled faintly and said with ridicule, I remember that you said earlier that you'll only attack once, and after that, no matter if I'm dead or alive, you won't attack again, right? This. Yichunli's gaze suddenly tightened, and an embarrassed expression surfaced on his face. Before he attacked, he had indeed said that he would only attack once. After that, regardless of whether Nie Tion lived or died, he would not attack again. These words were said very arrogantly, But this was because Yi Chunli had full confidence in his sword. Before he attacked, he had already noticed that Nie Tian's aura was unstable and his blood was restless. Therefore, he was absolutely certain that the latter would not be able to block his sword. But the fact was that Nie Tian actually withstood his sword. It could only be said that Yi Chunli was overly confident. Nie Tian's terror was beyond his imagination. He even felt that if Nie Tian was in peak condition before he fought with him, the outcome of this battle might not be certain. Before Nie Tian fought with Yi Chunli, he had already killed Yi Chenxiang and severely injured Yi Chenfeng. At that time, his condition was already very weak. But what Yi Chunli did not know was that Nie Tian's most terrifying trump card had not been revealed yet. Nie Tian's strongest trump card was not the Godfiend's sword intent, but the 9 Extreme Chaos Beast. But he remembered Fat Cat's words. Even at the moment of life and death, he would not use the 9 Extreme Chaos Beast. Therefore, even when facing an opponent like Yi Chunli, Nie Tian did not use the 9 Extreme Chaos Beast. Fortunately, he blocked Yi Chunli's sword and won a chance of survival for himself. You won't go back on your words, right? Nie Tian looked at Yi Chunli. The latter's eyes were filled with killing intent that was even stronger than before. Of course, I, Yi Chunli, am a man of my words. Yi Chunli laughed coldly and suddenly turned to look at Yi Chenfeng on the other side. He said solemnly, "Old Five, go and kill him." Yi Chenfeng was stunned. He looked at Yi Chunli and could not react for a moment. "I asked you to kill him," Yi Chunli said coldly. His eyes were cold. Yi Chenfeng felt the sharp killing intent in Yi Chunli's eyes, and his body could not help but tremble. He actually took a few steps back subconsciously. He did not expect that Yi Chunli would actually ask him to kill Nie Tian. Impressive. Seeing this scene, Nie Tian could not help but laugh coldly. He said solemnly, "You, Yi Chunli, are indeed a man of your words. You can't make a move, but you actually let your brother do it. What a good move." Yi Chunli was not only cold and ruthless, but also very shameless. He did not make a move now, but let Yi Chenfeng do it. What was the difference between this and him making a move himself? "No matter what you say, you're dead today." Yi Chunli smiled cold. He did not take Nie Tian's mockery to heart. It was because he saw how strong Nie Tian was that he was even more determined to kill Nie Tian. He felt a threat from Nie Tian, so he must kill Nie Tian. "Big brother, I." At this time, Yi Chenfeng reacted. He actually had an embarrassed expression. He looked at Nie Tian with some fear in his eyes. You're afraid of him?" Yi Chunli saw Yi Chenfeng's appearance, and his face could not help but darken. He asked cold. Yi Chenfeng swallowed his saliva and nodded. He was indeed very afraid of Nie Tian. Even though the current Nie Tian was already in an extremely weak state, he still did not dare to make a move. Previously, Nie Tian's sword almost took his life. That scene was still lingering in his mind, and he could not get it out of his mind. In his mind, Nie Tian was simply a monster. Although Nie Tian looked like he had no strength to fight back, who knew if this monster was really in disguise? Therefore, Yi Chenfeng really did not dare to make a move on Nie Tian. Trash! Yi Chunli saw Yi Chenfeng's cowardly appearance and growled. Then, he locked his gaze on Yin Xianwei. "Your Highness, I'll kill him." Yin Xianwei stepped forward and said flatteringly without waiting for Yi Chunli to speak. She had always been worried that the Dead Knight Empire might vent their anger on her because of Yi Chenxiang's death. Although she did not kill Yi Chenxiang, the latter came here because of her. Now, it was a very good opportunity to kill Nie Tian for Yi Chunli, and she could curry favor with the Dead Knight Crown Prince. More importantly, Yin Xianwei had been waiting for a chance to kill Nie Tian with her own hands. If Nie Tian died in the hands of someone else, she would be very happy. But if she could kill Nie Tian with her own hands, she would be even happier. At this moment, Nie Tian had already lost the ability to resist, and was completely a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. It was a good opportunity for her to make a move. "Nie Tian, I've been waiting for this moment." Then, In Xianyue's figure moved, and she quickly approached Nie Tian. Her eyes were surging with a burning desire for revenge. "In Xianyue, I said that you will never have the chance to kill me." Nie Tian looked at In Xianyue and said indifferently, "This sentence is still valid." Chapter 22-21. In Xianyue noticed the strange look on Nie Tian's face, and could not help but frown. "You're just bluffing." But the next moment she made up her mind, and with a roar, her figure moved, and directly struck out with her palm. A terrifying palm shadow appeared, pressing straight towards Nie Tian. In Xianyue used all her strength in this palm strike, determined to kill Nie Tian. At this time, Nie Tian's aura was very weak, and he had no power to resist at all. But his expression was very indifferent, without the slightest fear, but a playful look on his face. He even looked at In Xianyue with a sympathetic gaze. It was as if the one who was going to die next was not him, but In Xianyue. Boom! The palm shadow in the air rolled like a dragon, falling straight down like a mountain, smashing towards Nie Tian. The eyes of the crowd trembled, as if they could already see the scene of Nie Tian being killed. But at this critical moment, a sudden change occurred. Buzz! High in the sky, a strange sound rang, and immediately a huge vortex appeared in the air. The space suddenly trembled and was instantly pulled taut. The next moment, a strange scene happened. The palm shadow in the air was swallowed by the vortex and disappeared. "What's going on?" The sudden scene made In Xianyue's beautiful eyes tremble, her face dull, completely unaware of what was going on. "Huh!" And in the sky, In Chen Li's eyes also narrowed, a strange look on his face. "What's going on? Am I seeing things?" The reaction of the crowd was even more horrified. One by one, they exclaimed loudly, puzzled. In Xianyue's palm was about to kill Nie Tian, but it was swallowed by a vortex that suddenly appeared. Such a scene was too strange. "In Xianyue, I told you, you won't have the chance to kill me." Nie Tian looked at In Xianyue and smiled faintly, with a playful look on his face. "Impossible! This princess must kill you with my own hands today." In Xianyue was infuriated by Nie Tian's words. With a fierce roar, his aura surged crazily as he slammed his palms down simultaneously. Two palm shadows swept out like raging dragons. "You're courting death." At that moment, a deep roar rang out from the void. Immediately after, a huge hand stretched out from the huge vortex in the sky and easily blocked the two palm shadows. Then, it covered In Xianyue. No! In Xianyue suddenly felt a mighty force coming from all directions, and in his panic, he couldn't help but scream. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled sound was heard, and In Xianyue's figure was directly sent flying backward. He was blasted 10,000 meters away and smashed into the ground, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Seeing this, the onlookers all gasped in astonishment. From beginning to end, no one appeared in the void, but In Xianyue was inexplicably sent flying. "Who is it? Come out!" At this moment, In Chen Li finally couldn't bear it anymore and roared in a deep voice. In his hand, the Li Yuan dark sword once again appeared, and he directly blasted it out. A sharp and murderous dark sword shadow whizzed out and blasted straight toward the strange vortex in the sky. At this moment, the strange vortex spun wildly, and instantly turned into a terrible storm, like a giant dragon, soaring into the sky. Boom! Immediately, the two forces collided, and a loud roar sounded in the air. The terrible power raged, and the whole world seemed to be torn apart. Boom! 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 Waves of terrifying airwaves spread out, forcing the crowd to retreat. The earth was directly torn apart, and the sand and stones were directly crushed, turning into turbid waves, rolling in the air. Just as Nie Tian's figure was about to be submerged by the shock wave, a figure suddenly appeared, took him away, and rushed into the sky. "Long time no see." Nie Tian steadied himself, looked at the familiar face next to him, and called out a name with a faint smile, "An jamming." That's right, the person who appeared at this moment was none other than Sacred Lord Mysterious Dragon, an jamming. Seeing how calm you are, you must have noticed my existence long ago. An jamming also smiled, and at the same time, placed his palm on Nye Tian's back, and released a stream of power into the latter's body. Nye Tian felt an endless stream of vigorous power flowing into his body. It was very gentle, and instantly healed his injured dragon meridians to a large extent. "Many thanks," Nye Tian smiled, and swept away the blood stains on his body, and his pale face slightly recovered. He swept his divine sense over an jamming, and was quite surprised. At this moment, an jamming's strength was actually in the late paramount god stage. He still remembered that when he and an jamming separated, the latter was far from this strong. However, an jamming was a reincarnated person, and as long as his memories continued to awaken, his strength would continue to recover, and he would continue to grow stronger. Therefore, it was much easier for him to improve his strength compared to others. An jamming was indeed worthy of being Sacred Lord Mysterious Dragon. Although they were both in the late paramount god stage, his strength completely crushed Jianue. Even when facing Chunli head-on, he was not at a disadvantage at all. In fact, Nye Tian had long noticed an jamming's existence, and the latter had already arrived before Chunli made a move. However, the strange thing was that an jamming did not immediately appear, but waited until the moment when Nye Tian was about to die, and finally made a move. An jamming, you could have made a move earlier, why did you wait until now? Nye Tian smiled bitterly and said, "Aren't you afraid that I will die in Chunli's hands?" An jamming's lips curled into a faint smile, and with a face full of confidence he said, "You are the person chosen by that lord, you won't die so easily." "That lord?" Nye Tian was stunned for a moment and asked with a puzzled face, "What do you mean? Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed." An jamming smiled strangely, and did not answer Nye Tian. Nye Tian's brows furrowed, and he knew that an jamming would not say much, so he did not continue to ask. Since an jamming's strength had recovered to the late stage paramount god, it also meant that his memory had more or less been awakened, and he must have known something. After all, he was a person who had reincarnated countless times, and no one knew what he had experienced in the past. Nye Tian was very puzzled. An jamming said that he was the person chosen by that lord. What did that mean? Who was that lord? Could it be that mysterious man? Nye Tian frowned and guessed in his heart, could it be that an jamming knows that mysterious man? Nye Tian, there are some things that you will naturally know when the time is right. The most important thing for you now is to improve your strength, and you don't need to think about anything else. An jamming glanced at Nye Tian, and said with a slight nod. Nye Tian looked at an jamming, and felt a little strange. Such words were usually said by the mouth of an elder, and it was more appropriate. However, an jamming looked younger than Nye Tian. Because of this, Nye Tian sometimes almost forgot that an jamming was an old monster who had lived for more than 600,000 years. However, an jamming's appearance made him very happy, and also very relieved. Chapter 22:22. What's going on? Who is that guy? How can he be so strong? An jamming's sudden appearance caused a commotion among the crowd. This battle was full of twists and turns. It was beyond everyone's expectations. Everyone's eyes were filled with doubt, but they were filled with passion. They were looking forward to the battle between Chunli and an jamming. Nye Tian, take a rest first. Leave the rest to me. An jamming smiled faintly and gestured for Nye Tian to step back. Nye Tian nodded slightly. He was very weak at the moment and urgently needed rest to recover. Who are you? At this moment Chunli spoke. Cold eyes stared at an jamming as he growled in a low voice. I am Nye Tian's friend. An jamming smiled faintly and said, You are the crown prince of the Dead Knight Empire, after all. How can the words of the Crown Prince sound like a fart? Don't you feel ashamed? His calm voice was filled with mockery. This has nothing to do with you. Yi Chunli's face was cold as he said, "Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't get involved in this, because you can't afford to." Is that so? Enai Jianming's lips curled into a provocative arc. He said indifferently, "What if I insist on getting involved? Then you will be the enemy of the Dead Knight Empire." Yi Chunli roared in anger. The aura of his body was gradually becoming stronger. The dark sword aura surged in the space, and the sky became much darker. "It's just the Dead Knight Empire. Do you think I'm afraid?" Enai Jianming sneered and took a step forward. The aura around him surged like a stormy sea, forming a terrifying whirlpool in the air. "Looking down on the Dead Knight Empire, you are courting death." Yi Chunli was completely enraged. He let out a violent roar and moved. Li Yuan slashed down ferociously. Boom! In an instant, the sword will condensed and a dark sword shadow appeared. It was like a wild beast from hell, and it fell straight at Enai Jianming. In the void, dark clouds surged and the sky changed color. The space let out a low sound as though it was wailing. When the crowd felt the aura of Yi Chunli's sword, their expressions instantly changed, and they were extremely terrified. Enai Jianming wasn't nervous in the slightest when facing Yi Chunli's terrifying sword. Instead, he laughed, and then his figure moved. The enormous vortex outside his body whistled out and enveloped the sword image. Just as the sword shadow and the vortex collided, a strange scene occurred. That huge vortex actually swallowed the dark sword shadow directly. The 10,000-meter-long dark sword was devoured, as if it had vanished into thin air. How is this possible? Yi Chunli was stunned by the scene in front of him. He could no longer keep his composure and cried out strangely. Enai Jianming smiled, but his figure suddenly retreated. He came to Nie Tian's side and said, "Nie Tian, let's go." After saying that, the two figures moved together and directly rushed toward a cave behind them. The figures of the two were very fast. Before anyone could react, they had already disappeared from the cave. "Big brother, this is bad." After a few seconds, the fifth prince of the Dead Knight Empire, Yi Chunfeng, suddenly reacted. He looked at Yi Chunli and cried out strangely. "What's wrong?" Yi Chunli's eyes focused, and he asked in astonishment. Yi Chunfeng pointed to a cave and said with a horrified expression, They entered that cave." Yi Chunli's face darkened, and he immediately understood. Nie Tian and Enai Jianming entered the fifth level's cave number 99. This cave was the cave that hid the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. "Big brother, let's go in quickly. If they discover the secret of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus, then it'll be terrible." Yi Chunfeng had a horrified expression as he transmitted his voice to Yi Chunli. "No way." Yi Chunli reached out to stop Yi Chunfeng and said, "If we go in now, it's no different from sending ourselves to death." Yi Chunfeng was stunned for a moment, and then he reacted and said, "Yes. They must be waiting for us at the cave entrance. As long as we enter, they'll attack instantly and catch us unprepared." Yi Chunli nodded. This was exactly what he was worried about. He reckoned that Enai Jianming's strength was not beneath his. If it was a head-on battle, he still had some confidence, but if he was ambushed by Enai Jianming, he would be in great danger. More importantly, the strength that Enai Jianming had displayed was too strange. Anyone who saw that kind of means would be fearful. Hence, at this time, Yi Chunli did not dare to enter the cave at all. "Big brother, then what should we do?" Yi Chunfeng's eyes flickered and he was very nervous. The fifth level's cave number 99 was the Yi clan's greatest secret. Once it was discovered by others, it would be terrible. "You go back and inform the people in the clan. I'll wait here. As long as they dare to come out, I'll definitely kill them personally," Yi Chunli said to Yi Chunfeng coldly. Because the matter this time was special, there were no experts following by his side. But the development of the matter exceeded Yi Chunli's expectations. He did not know what to do now either, and could only ask the upper echelons of the clan to step forward. "All right." Yi Chunfeng nodded heavily and then turned to leave. The crowd watched in a daze. They did not expect that this great battle would actually end in such a manner. But Yi Chunli's expression at this moment was incomparably sinister. To him, this battle had not ended. It was just the beginning. At the same time, in the cave. "Which cave is this?" Nie Tian looked at the surrounding stone walls and asked in a daze. The speed at which he entered just now was too fast, and he did not have the time to see clearly which cave it was. "The 5th level, cave number 99. And I Jiaming laughed and said, "Isn't this the cave that you wanted to enter? You also know about this?" Nie Tian was stunned. It seemed that Enai Jiaming had arrived long ago, but he only sensed the latter's existence later. Enai Jiaming nodded and smiled. Then, his face stiffened, and his expression instantly became solemn. He said, "Nie Tian, I'm sorry. I didn't take good care of Ro. I lost her." Nie Tian saw Enai Jiaming's self-reproach and laughed. He said, "Don't worry, I've already found Ro. She's with my friend now, and she's very safe." "You found Ro?" Enai Jiaming's pupils shrank when he heard Nie Tian's words. He took a step forward, grabbed Nie Tian's shoulders excitedly, and shouted, "Where is she now?" Seeing Enai Jiaming so nervous, Nie Tian could not help but smile. He said, "Didn't I say that she's very safe now? Don't worry." Enai Jiaming looked at Nie Tian and confirmed that the latter was not teasing him. He then let out a long sigh of relief. The big stone that had been hanging in his heart was finally lifted. He had been worried about Nie Yuro's safety. If something really happened to the latter, he would feel guilty for the rest of his life. Now that he knew that Nie Yuro was safe, he was finally relieved. Then, Nie Tian briefly told him about his encounter with Nie Yuro and Xiao Guai. After listening to Nie Tian, Enai Jiaming was completely relieved. When he knew that Nie Yuro had been captured by Yin Xianyue and became his martial slave, his eyes trembled. He regretted not killing Yin Xianyue just now. Chapter 22-23. In the cave, when Enai Jiaming heard Nie Tian ask about Dishi, he couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth, revealing a strange smile. "What's wrong?" Nie Tian saw Enai Jiaming's strange expression and couldn't help but frown. "Nie Tian, you don't have to worry about Lord Dishi. He is in the Burial Cloud Mountain Range and is currently doing something important. He can't show himself for the time being." Enai Jiaming smiled and said mysteriously. Nie Tian was speechless. Since Enai Jiaming didn't want to say more, he didn't ask. He was relieved to know that Dishi was fine. "Enai Jiaming, why didn't you kill Yichunli just now?" Nie Tian asked. Enai Jiaming smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Do you think I didn't want to? I may not be a match for Yichunli with my current strength." "That's impossible." Nie Tian frowned. He clearly saw that Enai Jiaming received 2 sword strikes from Yichunli with ease. He thought that Enai Jiaming's current strength was enough to crush Yichunli. Yichunli is the crown prince of the Dead Knight Empire. His talent in martial arts is definitely at the peak level in the abandoned land. Enai Jiaming smiled and said, "My current strength has just recovered to the late stage of paramount god. Perhaps in your eyes, it was very easy for me to receive 2 sword strikes from Yichunli. But you don't know that I have been injured by him. You will understand if you feel my Yuan meridians now." Nie Tian was stunned when he heard Enai Jiaming's words. He then used his divine sense to feel Enai Jiaming's Yuan meridians. As expected, there were cracks on Enai Jiaming's Yuan meridians. So Yichunli is so strong. Seeing Enai Jiaming's injuries, Nie Tian couldn't help but exclaim, "Of course." Enai Jiaming shook his head and smiled bitterly. "But your means are very strange. I guess Yichunli is afraid, so he doesn't dare to rush into the cave." Nie Tian looked at Enai Jiaming and smiled faintly. Enai Jiaming nodded and suddenly asked, "Nie Tian, how do you know about the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus?" "I have a friend who told me." And I jamming smiled faintly and said, 9 hearts demon lotus. One lotus has 9 hearts, and 9 hearts become one. Legend has it that it is a rare flower that can absorb the power of heaven and earth and fuse it into one. It is rumored that this is a strange flower of the heavens and earth. It can absorb the energy of the 9 elements of the world and fuse them into one. When a martial artist absorbs the power of the 9 hearts demonic lotus, not only can they increase their strength, but they can also increase their martial arts talent. But I've only heard of it. I've never seen it before. I never expected that the 9 hearts demonic lotus would actually be in the 1,000 Demons cave. Nye Tian nodded, but he couldn't help but feel surprised. Jamming nodding. And I jamming smiled. Ji Tian, Nye Tian, you seem to want the 9 hearts demon lotus very much. And I jamming looked at Nye Tian and said with a faint smile. You seem to want the 9 hearts demon lotus, Nye Tian. And I jamming looked at Nye Tian and smiled faintly. Who would have thought that one of the guardian families, the Lin family, would actually produce a 9 elements unite martial artist? After hearing what Nye Tian said, and I jamming's eyes couldn't help but tremble. He said excitedly, Nye Tian, can I see Lin Chen? And I jamming was excited after hearing Nye Tian. Nye Tian, can I see Lin Chen? Lin Chen is from the guardian families. Nye Tian thought to himself. He was surprised to hear it from Ni jamming. Lin Chen is with me. I have an internal small world called the 9 Superbs. He is in there. Nye Tian nodded and said worriedly, there is a strong prohibition in this cave. If Lin Chen comes out, he might not be able to withstand it. And I jamming laughed and said, Nye Tian, you underestimate the talent of a 9 energies as one martial artist. It is no exaggeration to say that a 9 energies as one martial artist can at least enter the 7th level of the 1,000 Demons cave. The 7th level of the cave. Nye Tian was stunned for a moment. He then smiled and said, you must be joking. I heard from others that no one has ever entered the 7th level of the cave. That is because the 9 energies as one martial artist has not come out. And I jamming laughed and said confidently, don't worry. Let Lin Chen come out. He will be fine. Nye Tian nodded and secretly asked Fat Cat. The latter also nodded. He then took out the 9 Superbs and let Lin Chen out. Brother Nye Tian, who is he? Lin Chen came out and suddenly saw a stranger. He could not help but feel afraid and instinctively retreated to Nye Tian's side. Lin Chen. He is my friend. Nye Tian smiled faintly and touched Lin Chen's little head. And I jamming looked at Lin Chen and sized him up. He could not help but nod and said, he is indeed a 9 energies as one martial artist. In the next moment, he immediately reacted and said in surprise, Nye Tian, you want to use the 9 hearts demon lotus to help Lin Chen activate the 9 energies divine seal, right? Yes. Nye Tian was stunned at first, then he nodded. He did not expect that Ni jamming not only knew about the 9 energies as one, but also the 9 energies divine seal. Only an old demon would have such knowledge. Alright, then let's go find the 9 hearts demon lotus now. Ni jamming nodded and smiled. He could not help but pinch Lin Chen's little face. He was very happy. Nye Tian looked at Ni jamming. It seemed that the latter did not know that the guardian family had betrayed him. After thinking for a while, Nye Tian decided to tell Ni jamming about the guardian family later. Then, the 3 of them carefully walked into the cave. Ni jamming walked at the front, Lin Chen was in the middle, and Nye Tian was at the back. A 9 energies as one martial artist is indeed talented. Lin Chen is actually fine in this cave. Nye Tian looked at Lin Chen and thought to himself. After a while, the 3 of them came to the end of the cave and entered a rock cave. The moment they entered the rock cave, the scene that appeared in front of them completely shocked them. This was an empty rock cave. In the rock cave there was a small lake with a radius of about 1,000 meters. The surface of the lake was completely covered by a strange flower. Looking closely, the flower petals were constantly changing colors. One moment they were crimson like fire, the next moment they were golden like wheat, and the next moment they were emerald like leaves. The color of the light in the entire rock cave was constantly changing, and it looked magnificent. This is... Nie Tian looked at the scene in front of him, and his eyes trembled slightly. He was so surprised that he could not speak. 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. And Jianming swallowed his saliva and said with a dull face. Lin Chen's little face was stiff. His mouth was wide open, but he could not make a sound. It really is the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. At the same time, Fat Cat's excited voice sounded. Each flower had 9 petals. It was the 9 Flames Demon Lotus. In the center of the petals, there was a flower that was as clear as snow. It was the heart of the Demon Lotus. Without a doubt, these flowers above the rock cave lake were the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. Nie Tian knew that there were 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses in this cave, but he did not expect there to be so many. Roughly estimating, there were at least thousands of 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses. The value of thousands of 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses was immeasurable. Fat, how many 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses do I need to activate Lin Chen's 9 Energies seal and let my strength advance to the Supreme Realm? After a while, Nie Tian became cold and suddenly asked. One is enough. Fat Cat answered with a smile. Then is 9 Hearts Demon Lotus enough for us? Nie Tian's eyes were slightly hot as he continued to ask. Chapter 22-24. Take them all. Nie Tian was stunned when he heard Fat Cat's laughter. Opening the 9 primordial divine seal for Lin Chen and advancing to the paramount god realm for Nie Tian only needed 9 Hearts Bewitching Lotus. But there were thousands of 9 Hearts Bewitching Lotuses in front of them. Nie Tian had thought that 9 Hearts Bewitching Lotus would be enough. But the little Fat Cat actually wanted to take away all of the 9 Hearts Demonic Lotuses. This caused him to be completely stunned. After staring blankly for a dozen seconds, Nie Tian finally snapped out of his daze and asked, his lips slightly dry, Little Fatty, are we really going to take all of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses with us? Of course. Fat Cat laughed and said proudly, have you forgotten? You have the 9 extremities. We can put this lake of demonic lotuses into the 9 extremities. Nie Tian's gaze suddenly flickered, and his eyes became incomparably blazing. He was so excited that he forgot that he had the 9 extremities. He was just worried about how to take away thousands of 9 Hearts Bewitching Lotuses. The 9 Hearts Bewitching Lotus was a rare treasure. It couldn't be kept in a space ring, which would greatly reduce its efficacy. It was a waste. But it was different with the 9 extremities. Nie Tian could put the lake in front of him directly into the 9 extremities. In this way, thousands of 9 Hearts Bewitching Lotuses would be perfectly moved, and wouldn't be affected at all. It would just be a change of living environment. He believed that with the vitality of the 9 Hearts Bewitching Lotus, it would definitely be able to adapt to the 9 extremities. Thinking of this, Nie Tian couldn't help but smile. He couldn't hide the huge surprise in his heart. There were thousands of 9 Hearts Bewitching Lotuses. He was really rich this time. Nie Tian, what are you thinking about? And Jianming didn't know the conversation between Nie Tian and Fat Cat. He couldn't help but ask when he saw the latter's strange expression. And Jianming, I want to take all of these 9 Hearts Bewitching Lotuses. Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly. You. And Jianming was stunned for a moment, and his face stiffened for a moment, as if he was doubting his own ears. He said in astonishment, What did you say? I said, I will take all of these 9 Hearts Demonic Lotuses with me. Nie Tian repeated as he took out the 9 extremities and said, I'm going to place this lake of the Bewitching Lotus into the 9 extremities. And Jianming's eyes suddenly trembled, and he immediately reacted. His divine senses swept over the 9 extremities, and he looked extremely terrified. Previously, he had only heard Nie Tian mention casually that there was an item beside him that had a world of its own, and it was called the Nine Extremities. However, he had never expected that the 9 superbs mentioned by Nie Tian was actually a real world. Nie Tian, where did you get the 9 superbs in your hands? And Jiaming was stunned for a long time before he asked with a frown. I created it myself. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He then activated the holographic divine rune and carefully sensed the demonic lotus lake in front of him. And Jiaming was stunned again. His mouth was wide open, and he could not make a sound for a long time. However, Nie Tian did not care about him, and focused on sensing the situation of the demonic lotus lake. He first had to determine how big the lake was, whether there were any restrictions around it, and whether there were other things under the lake. After a while, Nie Tian confirmed that there was nothing strange about the lake, and he said with a faint smile, "Very well, there's nothing strange about this lake. I can directly dig the lake out from the cave." Nie Tian, you want to dig the lake out? And Jiaming was stunned for a while, and his eyes trembled as he asked, "Why can't I?" Nie Tian laughed and said faintly, "But before that I need to recover my strength." The demonic lotus lake was only about 1,000 meters in circumference. For Nie Tian, it was not difficult to dig the entire lake out. However, his current state was very weak, and he needed to recover his strength before he could do it. Actually, Jiaming could do it on his behalf. However, Nie Tian knew that Jiaming was also injured. The 9 Hearts demonic lotus was extremely precious, and to prevent any accidents, Nie Tian decided to do it himself. After all, he had the holographic divine pattern, and he could sense all the movements in the surrounding space at any time. This was something that even Jiaming could not do. Next, Nie Tian sat cross-legged, and began to slowly recover his strength. Jiaming and Lin Chen watched from the side, and did not disturb him. After half a day, Nie Tian stood up again, and his entire body's aura had mostly recovered. Originally, his 9 dragon veins were the most heavily injured, and after he received treatment from Jiaming, his dragon veins recovered slightly. At this moment, with his insane recovery ability, he recovered very quickly. We can start. Nie Tian looked at the lake in front of him with a burning gaze, and the corners of his mouth curled into a confident smile. Although his state had not returned to normal, he was very confident that he could easily dig the entire demonic lotus lake in front of him. Nie Tian waved his hand, and let Jiaming and Lin Chen leave the cave. He took a deep breath, and his body began to slowly release the power of the stars. The endless power of the stars, like falling starlight, instantly enveloped the entire lake. With a thought, Nie Tian controlled the power of the stars, and seeped it into the ground where the lake was. He activated the holographic divine pattern, and was very careful to sense the distribution of the power of the stars. Alright. After a long time, Nie Tian felt that the power of the stars had been evenly distributed under the ground, and enveloped the entire lake. He smiled and murmured, "Rise!" Boom! The moment he said that, the ground of the cave shook violently, and suddenly, the entire lake was lifted. Jiaming and Lin Chen saw this, and their nerves were stretched taut, and they did not dare to breathe. Slowly, the entire demonic lotus lake was lifted, and it slowly became suspended in the air. This was the most crucial moment. The power of the stars had to be very evenly distributed, or the soil under the lake would loosen, and by then, the entire lake might collapse. Nie Tian carefully controlled the entire lake, and did not dare to blink. Then, he took out the 9 extremities, and with a slight thought, the light of time and space was released. He controlled the demonic lotus lake and sent it directly into the 9 extremities. Then, he also entered the 9 extremities. The demonic lotus lake was still in a complete state. Nie Tian found a suitable valley, and let the entire lake slowly descend, bit by bit, close to the soil. Phew! It's a success. When the entire lake landed safely in the valley, Nie Tian let out a long breath, and his tense face relaxed. At this moment, on his forehead, there were dense beads of sweat. Thousands of 9 hearts demonic lotuses were too precious. If they were destroyed, Nye Tion's intestines would turn green with regret. Seeing that the demonic lotus lake was safely transferred into the 9 extremities, Nye Tion's heart was filled with indescribable joy. With so many 9 hearts demonic lotuses, not only could Nye Tion use them himself, but he could also give them to the people around him. These 9 hearts demonic lotuses originally belonged to the Yi clan. When Yi Chunli and the others entered the cave and found that there was only a bare cave left for them, what kind of expression would they have? Chapter 22-25. Nye Tion walked out of the 9 superbs. He was relaxed and in high spirit. Nye Tion, did you put the demonic lotus lake in the 9 superbs? Enai Jianming asked in surprise when he saw Nye Tion's expression. Nye Tion nodded and looked at the deep pit in the cave. He smiled and said, "This pit is not bad. Take it as a surprise for the Yi clan." Enai Jianming was stunned for a moment, then he smiled and said, "If the Yi clan knew that you took away the entire demonic lotus lake, I wonder how they would feel. I almost died in the hands of Yi Chunli. It's not too much to ask the Yi clan to pay a little as compensation." Nye Tion smiled faintly and stepped out of the cave, ready to leave. Enai Jianming was speechless. The Yi clan's payment was a little too much. "Enai Jianming, how do we get out of here?" Nye Tion walked out of the cave, but he was very worried and said, "Yi Chunli must be waiting outside. The powerhouses of the Yi clan might be here too. If we go out now, I'm afraid it will be very dangerous." Enai Jianming looked at Nye Tion and suddenly smiled strangely. He said, "Who said we are going out?" Nye Tion frowned and said, "If we don't go out, it's not a long-term solution to stay here. This cave was too important to the Yi clan. If the powerhouses of the Yi clan arrived and blocked Nye Tion and the others in the cave, it would be really troublesome." At this time, Enai Jianming smiled strangely. Then he moved and entered the cave again. Nye Tion did not know what Enai Jianming was up to. He followed him into the cave with a puzzled look. Then, Enai Jianming formed a strange seal with his hands and probed the stone walls around the cave bit by bit, as if he was looking for something. "Enai Jianming, what are you doing?" Nye Tion could not understand and could not help but ask. "I'm looking for a passage that leads to another cave," Enai Jianming replied but did not say much. Nye Tion's eyes narrowed. He did not know that there was a passage to another cave hidden in the cave. He was not in a hurry, and quietly watched from the side. Enai Jianming was very patient. He used the hand seals in his hands to test the rock walls of the cave inch by inch. "Found it!" After half an hour, Enai Jianming suddenly cried out in surprise. He pointed at a stone wall that was as smooth as a mirror and said, "It's here." Nye Tion and Lin Chen walked forward, confused. The stone wall in front of them was very smooth, and there was nothing on it. Even when Nye Tion activated the holographic divine rune, he couldn't sense anything. "Enai Jianming, are you sure there's a passageway here?" Nye Tion looked at the excited Enai Jianming and asked in astonishment. "Of course." Enai Jianming smiled confidently. Then, the seal in his hand suddenly released a ray of light that landed on the stone wall. In the next moment, a strange scene occurred. Boom! The stone wall shook violently, and immediately after, a crack appeared on it. Then, the crack gradually widened. In the end, it became a narrow passage about 2 meters high and half a meter wide. "There's really a passageway!" Nye Tion was shocked by the scene in front of him, and he let out a strange cry. However, this passageway was hidden too deeply, and he couldn't sense it at all. "There's a hidden passageway in every cave in the Thousand Demons Cave." Enai Jianming smiled faintly and explained, "This hidden passageway leads to the next layer of cave. We're now in the 5th layer of cave, so this passageway leads to the 6th layer of cave." This. Nye Tion's face suddenly changed, and he was so shocked that he couldn't speak. If every cave had a hidden passageway that led to the next layer of cave, didn't that mean that even if one entered the 1st layer of cave, One could enter the next layer one layer at a time, all the way to the 9th layer of cave? And this way of entering was not hindered by the restriction at the entrance of the cave. Nye Tian could sense that the restrictive spell he had felt when he had entered the cave had been the most oppressive, while the restrictive spell he had felt inside the cave had been weaker. You're right. And I jamming guessed what Nye Tian was thinking about, and he smiled faintly and said, if we can find the hidden passageway of the cave layer by layer, it's indeed much easier than directly entering from the entrance of the cave. However, even if this is the case, the number of martial artists who can enter the 7th level of the cave is extremely few. Nye Tian smiled bitterly and couldn't help but shake his head. No wonder after such a long time, almost no one could enter the 7th layer of cave. It turned out that the way to enter the cave was wrong. And I jamming once hid the dragon spring vein in the 1,000 Demons cave, so it wasn't strange that he was very familiar with the 1,000 Demons cave. Nye Tian, let's go. And I jamming smiled faintly and took the lead to enter the passageway. Nye Tian let Lin Chen follow and I jamming closely, and he stayed behind. The passageway was very narrow, and could only accommodate one person. The three of them walked in front and behind. After walking for about 5,000 or 6,000 meters, Nye Tian and the others finally saw the end of the passageway. We're out. And I jamming was the first to walk out of the passageway. He smiled faintly and looked very relaxed. Nye Tian and Lin Chen followed behind, and they were also very happy. At this time, they were in a cave on the 6th layer. Nye Tian immediately felt that the restrictive spells in the space of the cave were much stronger than on the 5th layer. Fortunately, the three of them had top-notch talents, so the restrictive spells didn't affect them too much. Not long after the three of them walked out of the passageway behind them slowly closed up and returned to normal. The passageway on the 6th layer is much safer here. Nye Tian smiled faintly, and he felt much more relaxed. They had left the original cave, so even if the Yi clan entered the cave, they wouldn't be able to find them. Nye Tian examined the cave in front of him and didn't find anything strange. Next, he planned to use the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus to break through to the Paramount God Realm. And I jamming knew what Nye Tian was thinking, and he smiled faintly and said, Nye Tian, this cave is very safe. Just focus on breaking through. Nye Tian nodded with a smile, then took out the 9 extremities and said to Lin Chen, let's enter the 9 extremities. Lin Chen was stunned. Although he didn't know why Nye Tian called him, he still nodded. The 9 extremities is indeed a good thing. And I jamming watched as Nye Tian and Lin Chen disappeared, then looked at the 9 extremities floating in the air and smiled. He was very surprised by what kind of power Nye Tian had obtained to be able to create a small world all by himself. It's very safe here. I'll go take a look and see if there's anything good in this cave. And I jamming didn't stand guard at the side, but turned around and walked into the depths of the cave. At the same time, in the 9 extremities, Nye Tian and Lin Chen came to the Valley of the Demonic Lotus, and Fat Cat appeared. Lin Chen was startled by Fat Cat, but when he saw that the latter was not fierce, but very cute, he quickly got used to it. Next, Nye Tian directly plucked a 9 Hearts Demon Lotus, placed it in his palm, and asked, Fat, what do we do now? Leave it to me. Fat Cat chuckled, and used his fat paw to control the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus to float in front of him. Chapter 22-26. Fat Cat used the glazed light to cut open the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. The heart of the Demon Lotus and the Demon Lotus 9 flames immediately separated. At this moment, the light on the heart of the Demon Lotus and the Demon Lotus 9 flames dimmed a lot at the same time. The heart of the Demon Lotus was the heart of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus, and the Demon Lotus 9 flames was the 9 petals of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. Once the two fought, the life force of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus instantly weakened, and the light naturally dimmed. Little guy, this thing is for you, eat it. Fat Cat laughed and directly threw the heart of the Demon Lotus to Lin Chen. Lin Chen caught the heart of the demon lotus, and without saying anything, he directly swallowed it. This. Nie Tian was suddenly stunned and immediately reacted. He wanted to stop Lin Chen, but it was already too late. The heart of the demon lotus of the 9 hearts demon lotus contained such a terrifying power, and Lin Chen was a martial artist who had not even awakened his original spirit. Such a terrifying thing, directly swallowing it. Was it really okay? Don't worry, the 9 primordial divine seal will absorb most of the power of the heart of the demon lotus. This little guy will be fine. Fat Cat of course knew what Nie Tian was worried about and said with a smile. Boom. However, just as his voice fell, Lin Chen's figure suddenly soared into the sky, rushed into the air, and stood there. Lin Chen was after all only 6 or 7 years old, and was so scared that he screamed, and his throat went numb. Nie Tian was also stunned, and then looked at Lin Chen. Boom. At this moment, a terrifying power surged out of Lin Chen's body, and frantically circulated around his body, like a white flame, very strange. Such a strong power. Nie Tian felt the power around Lin Chen, and couldn't help but frown, and his face instantly turned pale. He then looked at Fat Cat and asked nervously, Fat, are you sure nothing will happen to Lin Chen? Believe me, this little guy will be fine. The Fat Cat chuckled confidently, then threw the demonic Lotus 9 flame to Nie Tian and said, Go find a secluded place and absorb the power of this thing. I can absorb the demonic Lotus 9 flames directly? Nie Tian was stunned and his face froze. The Fat Cat laughed and said, The 9 flames demonic lotus is where the power of the 9 hearts demonic lotus lies. For ordinary warriors, this is almost a fatal power. However, your martial body is very strong. It shouldn't be a problem for you to directly absorb the demonic Lotus 9 flames. Okay. Nie Tian was speechless. He couldn't help but look at Lin Chen before turning around to leave. However, he immediately thought of something and asked, Fat, the power of the demonic Lotus 9 flames is so strong. How long will it take for me to completely absorb it? About a month. The Fat Cat said indifferently, looking like she didn't care at all. A month? Nie Tian exclaimed. He didn't think it would take so long to absorb the demonic Lotus 9 flame. Kid, you're going to use the demonic Lotus 9 flame to break through to the paramount God stage. A month is like the speed of light. The Fat Cat also let out a strange cry, looking very displeased. Nie Tian was stunned. After thinking about it carefully, he realized that the Fat Cat was right. He was going to break through to the paramount God stage, and a month was definitely going to be the limit. It should be noted that it was normal for ordinary warriors to go into secluded cultivation for hundreds or even thousands of years to break through to the paramount God stage. Even those peerless geniuses would need years or even decades to break through to the paramount God stage. Nie Tian needed only a month to break through to the paramount God stage. He was a freak among freaks. Nie Tian didn't hesitate any longer. His figure flickered and he left. Moments later, he arrived at a remote valley and entered it. Looking at the demonic Lotus 9 flame in his hand, Nie Tian's eyes shone with a scorching light as he murmured, Whether or not I can break through to the paramount God stage depends on you. Next, he sat down cross-legged, opened his mouth, and swallowed the demonic Lotus 9 flame. In the blink of an eye, he felt an explosive force exploding inside of him. The pain was so intense that he couldn't take it, and he let out a howl of agony. Following that, an even more intense pain struck Nie Tian, causing his body to contort, and his face to contort into a vicious expression. He felt like the explosive force inside of him had turned into countless flames that were battering madly inside of him. That intense pain made him feel as if his blood, bones, meridians, and everything else in his body were on fire and being burned away. This heart-wrenching pain was something that Nie Tian had never imagined. His body trembled uncontrollably as his body continued to emit raging flames. His entire body was engulfed in flames, and his clothes were instantly burned to ashes, revealing his muscular body. However, this pain was only the beginning. Nye Tian could clearly feel that the flames inside his body were growing stronger and stronger. He felt like every bone in his body was burning red. From the outside, it looked like his skin had turned crimson, like burning steel. Through the crimson skin, one could clearly see his bones, blood, and meridians. Roar! Following this, the 9 dragon veins in his body began to tremble as if they were unable to withstand the burning of the 9 flames. They let out piercing cries. Nye Tian was immersed in an indescribable, shocking pain, but his consciousness remained clear. He could faintly feel that amidst this immense pain, the power in his body was slowly growing stronger. This feeling of growing stronger slightly offset some of the pain, making him feel much more comfortable. Following this, as the power of the demonic Lotus 9 flames became more and more violent, the flames around Nye Tian's body also burned more and more intensely. Those flames were very strange. They appeared to be 9 colors, and looked extremely resplendent and gorgeous. The 9 hearts demonic lotus was a rare flower of heaven and earth. At the same time, it absorbed the power of the 9 primordial forces of heaven and earth by relying on the demonic lotus 9 flames. The demonic lotus 9 flames had 9 petals. Each petal represented a type of primordial force of heaven and earth. The 9 petals erupted at the same time. That abundant power was simply unimaginably powerful. It was precisely by relying on the formidable power of the demonic Lotus 9 flames that Nye Tian could have the opportunity to assail the highest realm. Following this, after an unknown period of time, Nye Tian gradually felt the intense pain in his body gradually disappear. He was not too sure if it was because he had adapted to this kind of pain, or if the demonic Lotus 9 flames' power was weakening. But he was very certain that the aura in his body was slowly growing stronger. This rate of growth was extremely fast, and he could feel it firsthand. In this state of constantly growing stronger, Nye Tian's entire person became much calmer. His breathing was calm and steady as he began to absorb the power of the demonic Lotus 9 flames. Outside the canyon, Fat Cat watched this scene from afar. His tensed expression finally let out a long sigh of relief. In fact, he had been observing in the dark all this while. Nye Tian, your martial body is indeed abnormally powerful. Fat Cat murmured softly as his lips curled into a satisfied smile. He knew that the next step was for Nye Tian to slowly absorb the power of the demonic Lotus 9 flames. There was nothing to worry about. Chapter 22-27. In the blink of an eye, more than a month had passed. Among the 9 superbs, Lin Chen stood outside a canyon, the little fat cat lying on his shoulder, its 2 eyes staring straight at Nye Tian, as if it was waiting for something. Fat, why hasn't big bro Nye Tian done anything yet? Lin Chen looked at Nye Tian, his eyes glittering like black gems. By this point, he had fully absorbed the power of the demon lotus heart, opened the 9 nascent god seal, and awoke his nascent spirit. His aura was several times stronger than before, and even his body had become much taller and stronger. Lin Chen was very worried about Nye Tian, and his little face was scrunched up in anxiety. It's been almost 40 days, Fat Cat said, frowning. Nye Tian absorbed the power of the demon lotus 9-fold flames 10 days ago. He should have reached the paramount god level by now. Why hasn't he done anything yet? But right now, Nye Tian was completely focused on his cultivation, and couldn't be disturbed. Fat Cat had no choice but to wait patiently. Then, another 5 days passed. It had been a full month and a half since Nye Tian had started absorbing the demon lotus 9-fold flames. But Nye Tian was still sitting there in the valley, as still as a log. Only his breathing was steady and steady, indicating that he was still alive. This can't go on. What's going on inside Nye Tian? Fat Cat was getting impatient, and her deep blue eyes were glittering. If Nye Tian continued to be so quiet, something really might happen. Fat Cat couldn't figure out what was going on inside Nyetian that was keeping him from reaching the paramount god level. Lil Fatty, look! At this moment, Lin Chen suddenly shouted. He seemed to have discovered something and was very excited. Little Fat Cat froze for a moment, its eyes locked onto Nyetian, but it did not discover anything. It could not help but ask, "What's wrong? Didn't you see? Big Brother Nyetian's body is glowing." Lin Chen's eyes twinkled with joy. Fat Cat's eyes narrowed slightly as she stared closely at Nyetian. Finally, she noticed that there was a faint layer of light circulating around the latter's body. This layer of light was very weak. It seemed to be tightly attached to Nyetian's body, almost fusing with his body. Lin Chen's perceptive ability was very strong. This was the talent of a martial artist who had 9 elements in one. Even the Fat Cat could not compare. "Fatty, what kind of power is this? It's so terrifying." Lin Chen could feel the layer of light around Nyetian's body. It was extremely terrifying, and he couldn't help but ask. "This is—" Fat Cat paused for a second, and then realized something. She was so shocked that she couldn't speak. "Fat, what's wrong?" Seeing Fat Cat suddenly stiffen, Lin Chen couldn't help but frown and ask. But Fat Cat didn't seem to hear Lin Chen's words. She shook her head in horror and said repeatedly, "This is impossible, this is impossible, this is impossible." "Fat, what's wrong with you? Are you okay?" Lin Chen's little face was full of fear, and he asked anxiously. "Holy light. This is definitely holy light. How can there be holy light on Nyetian's body?" Fat Cat's face was dull, and she was completely scared out of her wits. She was very sure that the layer of light surging around Nyetian's body at this moment was holy light. Holy light was a unique light that could only be released by martial artists when they became saints. But Nyetian, at this time, was only breaking through to the paramount god realm. How could there be holy light outside of his body? What on earth was happening inside his body? At the same time that Fat Cat was shocked. Inside the star domain of the star stones, Nyetian's consciousness was standing tall, looking up at the stars above his head. His expression was one of utter shock and astonishment. His stupefied expression lasted for a few dozen seconds before he finally returned to normal. He was currently in the 8th layer of the Star River. In the center of the 8th layer of the Star River stood a floating giant made of light and shadow. This giant's body was so huge that it occupied an entire layer of the Milky Way. Nyetian simply couldn't estimate the size of the giant in front of him. He only knew that he could sense the boundless power of the stars from the glowing giant, as if the glowing giant had gathered the power of 800 billion stars in its body. Nyetian didn't even know when the giant had appeared in the 8th layer of the Star River. Although he had awakened the power of 800 billion stars when he became a over-god, nothing had appeared in the 8th layer of the Star River. Who are you?" Nyetian forced himself to calm down and muster the courage to ask. He could sense that the giant wasn't lifeless. It had its own consciousness. "Little guy, I have waited for nearly 1,000,000 years. You're finally here." The giant's voice boomed like thunder, as if it came from space itself. It caused the entire Star River to shake. You're... Nyetian's eyes trembled. He suddenly thought of a name and exclaimed, "You're the Starry Sky Saint." Nyetian had heard of the Starry Sky Saint before. Back when he was cultivating the Starry Sky ancient martial technique, a voice rang out in the Star River and told him that the Starry Sky ancient martial technique was created by the Starry Sky Saint. Nyetian still remembered the name. He speculated that the Starry Sky Saint was the creator of the Star Stones, or the owner of the Star Stones in the past. Now that he had encountered a giant with its own consciousness in the Star River, he naturally thought of the Starry Sky Saint. The Starry Sky Saint. The giant smiled when it heard the name. It didn't nod or shake its head. Instead, it said, "Little guy, are you ready?" "Ready? Ready for what?" Nyetian was stunned. He couldn't help but frown. He didn't understand what the giant was talking about. Ready to receive the saint's soul. With a laugh, the starlight giant's body shuddered violently, and in the next moment, it morphed into countless beams of starlight that shot towards Nyetian. Before Nyetian could react, he was enveloped by the endless starlight. In the next moment, he felt as if he had become a bottomless pit that was absorbing the starlight. The starlight around him kept surging into his body. What's going on? Nyetian screamed. He felt as if his body didn't belong to him anymore. He couldn't even feel his own existence. Little guy, this saint's soul is a great gift. You must make good use of it. At that moment, the giant's voice rang out and disappeared into the void. At the same time, outside the canyon, Fat Cat and Lin Chen were completely stunned. Chapter 22-28. Fat Cat was completely stunned by the scene in front of him. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. He had never thought that such a scene would happen. Then, in the blink of an eye, the starlight giant's body covered the entire Nine Extremities world. The Nine Extremities world was filled with the mysterious power of the stars. What kind of power is this? It's amazing. Lin Chen's perception was unique. He felt that the power of the stars was extremely powerful, but very gentle. He couldn't help but exclaim. However, in the next moment, the starlight giant in the air directly dissipated and disappeared in an instant. Fat Cat and Lin Chen were stunned. It was as if the scene just now was just an illusion and had never happened. Just at this moment, Nyetian cried out in alarm. His figure moved and he abruptly stood up, as if he had just woken up from a nightmare. Nyetian! Brother Nyetian! Fat Cat and Lin Chen saw Nyetian stand up and shouted almost at the same time. Then they directly stepped into the canyon and came to Nyetian's side. Nyetian's eyes were trembling. He looked very shocked, as if he was trying hard to remember something. Nyetian, are you okay? Fat Cat saw Nyetian's absent-minded look and waved his two paws in front of the latter and asked tentatively. It was only then that Nyetian finally came to his senses. His originally cloudy eyes instantly brightened. His pair of eyes were clear and bright like the stars. Nyetian, what happened? Fat Cat saw that Nyetian had recovered and asked anxiously. Nyetian let out a deep breath and explained everything that had happened in the Starry River, not leaving out a single detail. He didn't understand what happened and hoped that Fat Cat could give him an explanation. The soul of a saint. When the Fat Cat heard Nyetian say these 4 words, it couldn't help but be stunned. Its fat face froze in place, and it couldn't speak for a long time. Fat, what exactly is a saint's soul? Nyetian asked anxiously. He didn't know much about sages, so of course he didn't know what a sage's soul was. The soul of a saint is the remnant soul left behind by a saint after his death. The Fat Cat took a long time to react and explained, just like the bones of saints, they are the bones of saints after they died. The remnant soul of a sage. When Nyetian heard this, his eyes narrowed and his heart was filled with shock. He could not imagine how powerful the remnant soul of a sage was. At this moment, he suddenly thought of what the Starlight Giant had said before it disappeared. Little guy, this wisp of the sage's soul is a great gift. You must make good use of it. What did that mean? Could it be that the sage's soul from the 8th heaven had fused with him? Heavens, I've fused with the soul of a saint. Nyetian swallowed a mouthful of saliva and let out a strange cry. His whole body froze. The Fat Cat also came to his senses, and his eyes widened as he turned to stone. Only Lin Chen looked at Nyetian and the little Fat Cat with a confused expression. He had no idea what was going on. Considering his current level of knowledge, he didn't understand what it meant to be a sage's soul, so he wasn't surprised. How do you feel right now, Nyetian? After a moment, the Fat Cat calmed down a bit and looked over at Nyetian. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, he froze in place. To his surprise, Nye Tian had already reached the early paramount god level. Nye Tian stared in shock for a moment, then looked inside himself, only to find that he too was frozen in place. The man and the cat were petrified for a few more seconds before they reacted. I'm a paramount god? Nye Tian said in shock. Even as he examined his own aura, he still wasn't completely convinced. Moments ago, he hadn't felt anything at all, and yet he had somehow broken through to the paramount god level. If anyone else had seen what was happening, their eyes would have popped out of their sockets. Countless martial artists poured their blood, sweat, and tears into breaking through to the paramount god level. But Nye Tian had somehow managed to break through without even realizing it. Feel your own aura, Nye Tian, the fat cat said excitedly. Nye Tian nodded repeatedly, then trembled as his sword energy surged up into the sky. In the blink of an eye, Nye Tian was like an enormous sword that towered over heaven and earth, incomparably fierce and sharp. So powerful! Nye Tian couldn't help but exclaim, so powerful! He could clearly sense that his aura was several times stronger than it had been before. His battle prowess had definitely improved by leaps and bounds. It really is strong. Little Fat Cat finally reacted, its eyes trembling, and it was even happier than Nye Tian. Becoming a paramount god was exactly what Nye Tian had been aiming for. Now that he had finally become a paramount god, how could he not be happy? The difference between peak over god and early paramount god might seem like only one minor level, but the gap between them was like the difference between heaven and earth. Nye Tian was confident that, given his current strength and the power of his 3 forbidden magics, he would be able to fight an expert like Yin Chenli head-on. However, he was more interested in the soul of the sacred saint. What did the soul of a sage mean to him? What kind of changes had occurred to him now that he had fused with the soul of a sage? In fact, he still didn't know where the soul of a sage had come from. He couldn't be sure if the soul of a sage was the discarnate soul of the Starry Sky Paragon Sage. When he asked the Starry Sky Giant, the latter didn't answer him. No wonder my body was shrouded in a layer of holy light just now. So it was the soul of that saint. Little Fat Cat suddenly understood and exclaimed in realization. He knew that no matter how freakish Nye Tian was, he couldn't release holy light while trying to break through to the paramount god realm. Without a doubt, the layer of holy light didn't come from Nye Tian, but from the soul of a sage in the 8th heaven of the galaxy. The Fat Cat was also very interested in the soul of a sage. He looked at Nye Tian with shining eyes and asked, Nye Tian, can you still feel the soul of a sage? Nye Tian's eyes flickered. He took a deep breath and began to sense his body, trying to find the soul of a sage. However, what surprised him was that after carefully sensing his entire body, he did not find any aura of the saint's soul. His martial body and soul hadn't changed at all, except that they were stronger than before. The soul of a sage disappeared? The Fat Cat couldn't sense the aura of a sage's soul in Nye Tian either. He couldn't help but frown. But the next moment, he seemed to think of something. His expression changed, and he exclaimed, could it be that the soul of a sage is hiding in your body, waiting for an opportunity to take over your body? Chapter 22-29. Lin Chen, what happened? Seeing Lin Chen's small face suddenly turn pale, Nye Tian's eyes couldn't help but narrow as he asked in a surprised voice. Little fella, what did you sense? Little Fat Cat was taken aback as well, asking in shock. He was worried that the soul of the sage had not merged with Nye Tian's body, but was lurking in his body, waiting for an opportunity to take over his body. This kind of thing was not rare. Many experts would leave behind a remnant of their soul after they died, waiting for other martial artists to come and use their remnant soul to take over their body and be reborn. Just like Di Shirtian, who had wanted to take over Nye Tian's body, but Nye Tian was a fiend god embryo, and Di Shirtian was inexplicably trapped in the fiend god embryo. However, the situation now was completely different. Nie Tian had encountered the soul of a sage. The soul of a sage, even if it was just a remnant soul, contained unimaginable power. Fat Cat knew that Lin Chen was a martial artist with 9 elements in one, and his perception was stronger than his. At this moment, what exactly did Lin Chen feel? He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Right at this moment, Nie Tian also suddenly felt something, and his expression couldn't help but change. He was quite surprised. Boom! In the next moment, black runes began to gush out of his body, and instantly enveloped his entire body. Forbidden runes. Fat Cat frowned when he saw the black runes, and his expression changed as he exclaimed. It seemed that the forbidden runes in Nie Tian's body had suddenly gone out of control. What's going on? Nie Tian shouted. He wanted to control the forbidden runes, but he could not do so at all. Then, Nie Tian felt a strange force break out of his body. It was invisible and boundless, as if an invisible hand was gently caressing the forbidden runes around his body. In the next moment, he was shocked to find that the power of the forbidden runes had weakened a lot. That strange power seemed to be purifying the power of the runes. This is... Fat Cat sensed something and was surprised. After a while, she shouted, "Holy Qi!" He did not see the holy Qi, but he could clearly feel its presence. It was the holy aura that was purifying the runes of the forbidden technique. Then, the runes surrounding Nie Tian's body suddenly became violent and then rushed back into his body. Everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. What happened just now? Nie Tian stood rooted to the ground, and only spoke after a long while. Although it happened to him, he had no idea what was going on. Nie Tian, how do you feel now? Fat Cat was very calm, and there seemed to be a smile on her face as she asked. Nie Tian took a deep breath and sensed his own aura. He looked very surprised and said, "My strength seems to have increased a lot." Indeed, his current strength had increased significantly compared to before. In fact, he could even sense that he was on the verge of breaking through to the mid-paramount god level. It was a very strange scene. After all, he had only just broken through to the early paramount god level. Normally speaking, even if he practiced cultivation non-stop, it would take years for him to achieve another breakthrough. But now, Nie Tian could sense that he was bursting with power, and that he was on the verge of another breakthrough. "Excellent," Fat Cat said with a smile. "It seems my guess was correct." Seeing how mysterious Fat Cat was, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown and ask, "What did you figure out, Fat?" "Nie Tian," Fat Cat said with a faint smile, looking very confident, "I think the soul of that sage has completely fused with you, and is now circulating through your entire body." "Saint Chi?" Nie Tian was taken aback, a confused look on his face. He had never heard of sage energy, nor did he know what it was. If the soul of that sage had fused with him and become sage energy, then why had the talismans inside of him suddenly gone out of control? Apparently, Fat Cat could sense the confusion on Nie Tian's face. Chuckling, she continued, "Sage energy is a very basic type of sagely power. Some of the more powerful pseudo-sages can use it." "Pseudo-sages?" Nie Tian said, clearly taken aback. This was a name he had never heard of before. Fat Cat waved a paw, but didn't elaborate. "You don't need to know too much right now. All you need to know is that sage energy isn't a threat to you at all. In fact, it will be of great benefit to you. Eventually, when you reach the peak paramount god level and try to break through to the sage level, you'll realize how important sage energy is. The reason why you lost control of the Forbidden Technique rune just now was because this Saint Aura sensed that the Forbidden Technique rune was harmful to your martial body. Therefore, the Sage Aura directly purified the Forbidden Technique runes, allowing a portion of the Forbidden Technique runes to transform into the power within your body. The reason why your strength has increased is because of the talisman's power. Now you can sense that the level of the talismans has decreased. Nie Tion's eyes flickered when he heard Fat Cat's words. Then, he sensed his body and was stunned. He sensed that the level of the talismans had indeed decreased. Previously, the talismans had been at the mid-mystic level, but now they were at the high-mystic level. It had almost decreased by a whole level. I understand now, Fat. At that moment, Nie Tion finally figured it out, and said with an excited expression, "The reason why my strength has improved again is because of the power of those runes. The sage energy thinks that the talismans are harmful to my martial body. So, I want to purify the talismans and turn them into my own power. Am I right?" Fat Cat nodded. "That's right. Actually, I've known for a long time that the 3 great talismans aren't good things. Although they don't affect you much right now, they're a huge burden on your martial body. If it weren't for the talismans, you could have broken through to the paramount god level long ago. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out a way to get rid of the talismans, so I haven't said anything. But now, with the sage energy, the talismans inside of you will be gone in no time. Furthermore, the next time the sage energy purifies the talismans, you'll definitely be able to break through to the mid-police god level." Nie Tion nodded vigorously, looking very happy. He knew that the 3 great talismans weren't good things, and the mysterious person had warned him to use them as little as possible. But each time, his opponents had been too strong, and he'd been forced to use them. Now that he had the Saint Chi, he would be able to understand the forbidden runes perfectly. Furthermore, he could use the power of the talismans to break through to the next level. The soul of a sage could transform into the sage energy and purify the talismans. Chapter 2230. The level of the forbidden art rune dropped from mystic mid to yellow high. This wasn't too bad for Nie Tion. He could use the 3 forbidden arts to increase his strength to the late-stage paramount god level, and his battle prowess would definitely be much stronger than before. "Fat, why can't I sense the presence of the Saint Aura?" Nie Tion couldn't help but ask. He was also a little worried that the Saint Aura would pose a threat to him. The Saint Aura is a very mysterious power. You're too weak, so of course you can't sense it. Little Fat Cat chuckled and said, "However, this Saint Chi will definitely be of great benefit to your future growth." He could tell what Nie Tion was worried about. "Don't worry, you're someone with the fiend god nascent embryo. If the Saint Aura posed any threat to you, it would have been devoured by the power of the fiend gods the moment it appeared. Since the fiend god embryo didn't react, it means that the Saint Aura has already fused with you. It's a part of you now." Nie Tion let out a long sigh of relief when he heard Fat Cat's words. His face relaxed a lot. He suddenly looked at Lin Chen and sensed that the latter's origin spirit had awakened. He couldn't help but be surprised. "Lin Chen, your origin spirit has awakened." "Yes." Lin Chen nodded his little head and said excitedly, "Big brother Nie Tion, my origin spirit is very powerful." With that, his little body shook, and a white shadow appeared behind him. Nie Tion looked at the white shadow and couldn't help but narrow his eyes. It seemed that the shadow was in the shape of a dragon. "Big brother Nie Tion, this is my origin spirit, the Frost Wyvern." Lin Chen was very happy and said proudly, "Fat said that this is the origin spirit of a 9th order sovereign. Very powerful." Nie Tion nodded slightly and patted Lin Chen's head. The origin spirit of a 9th order sovereign was extremely rare. But since Lin Chen was a 9 elements fusing as one martial artist, his martial arts talent was outstanding. It was not strange for him to be able to awaken a supreme primordial spirit. "Big brother Nie Tion, what is your original spirit?" Lin Chen withdrew his original spirit and suddenly raised his head to look at Nie Tion. Nie Tion smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. His primordial spirit was very powerful, but it was a pity that he could not use it now. Lin Chen was very smart. Seeing that Nie Tion did not answer, he no longer asked. "Fat, how long have we been in the 9 extremities?" Nie Tion suddenly thought of something and asked in surprise. It's been 1.5 months, the fat cat replied calmly. Originally, he thought that Nye Tian would only need a month to absorb the power of the demonic lotus 9 flames. However, because of the sage soul, it dragged on for half a month. So long. Nye Tian was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly said, "Let's go out and take a look. I wonder how Enai Jiaming is doing." When they entered the 9 extremities, Enai Jiaming had been waiting outside. 1.5 months had passed. He had probably been waiting impatiently for a long time. Nye Tian did not hesitate and directly left the 9 extremities with Lin Chen. The fat cat returned to the origin fetus space. After leaving the 9 extremities, Nye Tian and Lin Chen appeared in the cave, but they did not find Enai Jiaming. Nye Tian was stunned for a moment and wondered, could it be that Enai Jiaming left? However, on second thought, he felt that it was unlikely. Enai Jiaming was not the kind of person who would leave without saying goodbye. This aura. At this moment, Lin Chen seemed to feel something. His pupils suddenly shrank and he immediately shouted, "It's Big Brother!" The next moment, he suddenly sprinted towards the depths of the cave. Lin Chen. Seeing this, Nye Tian called out and immediately followed. The two quickly arrived at the depths of the cave, and an empty space appeared in front of them. In front of them, a familiar figure appeared. It was Enai Jiaming. And beside Enai Jiaming, there was a figure lying on the ground with a very weak aura. "Big Brother!" Seeing the figure on the ground, Lin Chen wailed and directly rushed over. Nye Tian's eyes widened, and he went blank for a moment before he came to his senses. The person lying beside Enai Jiaming was Lin Chen's big brother. What the hell was going on? He took a step forward and came to Enai Jiaming's side, but he saw that Enai Jiaming's eyebrows were tightly knitted and his face was very ugly. The person lying on the ground was pale and unconscious. Obviously, he was already in a state of dying. Lin Chen grabbed the person's hand and wailed loudly. "Enai Jiaming, what happened?" Nye Tian frowned and asked anxiously. "Nye Tian, this cave is where I hid the dragon's spring vein." Enai Jiaming let out a long breath and began to explain. After listening to Enai Jiaming, Nye Tian finally understood everything. It turned out that this cave was the cave where the dragon's spring vein was hidden. Enai Jiaming did not know this before. He accidentally came to the depths of the cave and found Lin Yi, then he remembered everything. The person lying at his feet was Lin Chen's big brother, Lin Yi. Lin Yi and the others came to this cave a few months ago, originally for the dragon's spring vein. However, they had accidentally triggered a killing formation in the cave. The others had died miserably on the spot, and only Lin Yi had survived. However, he had been trapped in a restrictive barrier. Enai Jiaming found Lin Yi in the cave, and it took him more than a month to break the restrictive barrier and rescue Lin Yi. However, the current Lin Yi was already in a state of dying because of the suppression of the restrictive power. Enai Jiaming used a large amount of his life aura to barely save Lin Yi's life. What do we do now? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment, and his eyes swept to Lin Yi. His divine senses sensed that the latter's aura was extremely weak, as if it would disappear at any time. "My blood, I can use my blood to save my brother." At this moment, Lin Chen suddenly thought of something, and he screamed and directly bit his finger. "Stop!" However, at this moment, Enai Jiaming screamed and stopped Lin Chen. "Why don't you let me save my brother?" Lin Chen raised his head and looked at Enai Jiaming angrily. Enai Jiaming frowned and said, "Your brother is very weak now, and his body is filled with a strong restrictive power. He can't accept any power now, otherwise, he will cause the restrictive power to backfire and die instantly." This. Nye Tian heard Enai Jiaming's words, and his expression changed slightly. He did not expect the situation to be so serious. Even Lin Chen's blood couldn't save Lin Yi. Nye Tian immediately sensed, and indeed, he found that there was a strange power surging in Lin Yi's body, and it was going to become violent at any time. At this moment, Even if he channeled the power of the earth vein source into Lin Ye's body, it would cause the restrictive power to backfire. "Brother Nyetian, please save my brother, I don't want him to die." Lin Chen was a child after all, and he was so scared that he cried and shouted loudly. Nyetian's expression was ugly, and he did not know what to do in this situation. Fat Cat did not speak, and it was obvious that there was no other way. In this situation, there is only one way to save him. At this moment, Enai Jiaming's expression changed slightly, and a white light ball appeared in his hand. He said in a deep voice, "Let him integrate with this Dragon Spring Vein." Nie Tian looked at the light ball in Enai Jiaming's hand, and his eyes trembled, and he exclaimed. Chapter 2231. Fusing with the Dragon Spring Vein. Nie Tian was stunned when he heard Enai Jiaming's words. He even suspected that he had heard wrongly. Until now, he still did not know what the essence of the Dragon Spring Vein was. But he knew that the Dragon Spring Vein contained an immeasurable amount of power. In fact, even he himself had never thought of merging with the Dragon Spring Vein. But now, in order to save Lin Yi, Enai Jiaming had asked the latter to fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein. How could he not be shocked? Most importantly, he believed that Lin Ye's current state could not even accept the slightest bit of power. How could he fuse with the Dragon Spring Vein? And there was another question. Why would Enai Jiaming have a Dragon Spring Vein? "I just obtained this Dragon Spring Vein from the cave," Enai Jiaming explained, then looked at Lin Chen and asked, "Nie Tian, what do you think of Lin Chen? What do you mean?" Nie Tian was stunned, not understanding what Enai Jiaming meant. He is only a child, and his martial cultivation is still at the most basic level. Enai Jiaming frowned and said, "But his perception is unusually sharp. Especially his perception of the dragon chi, it can be said to be abnormal. Have you never doubted this?" Nie Tian was stunned. Enai Jiaming's words were indeed strange. Lin Chen's perception was indeed terrifying. Not to mention Nie Tian, even Fat Cat could not compare to it. Especially in terms of the dragon chi, it was even more terrifying. When he first came to the Burial Cloud mountain range, Nie Tian faintly sensed Di Shi's aura. But Lin Chen clearly sensed the dragon chi, and even determined Di Shi's identity as a golden dragon. Later, Nie Tian learned that Lin Chen was a dragon spring martial artist who had merged 9 elements into one, so it was normal for his perception to be abnormal. But now that he thought about it, Lin Chen's perception seemed a little strange. "Enai Jiaming, what do you want to say? Just say it." Nie Tian frowned and said in a deep voice. "Lin Chen is a martial artist who fused with the Dragon Spring Vein." Enai Jiaming stared at Lin Chen and said in a deep voice. "What?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he exclaimed. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that Lin Chen had actually merged with the Dragon Spring Vein. How powerful was the Dragon Spring Vein? Lin Chen was only a child, how could he fuse with it? Nie Tian, that is indeed the case. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out. Nie Tian was taken aback and stood rooted to the ground. Since Fat Cat said so, then there was no doubt about it. But he really couldn't imagine that a child like Lin Chen could fuse with something as powerful as the Dragon Spring Vein. The Dragon Spring Vein was divided into 6 parts by Enai Jiaming. The largest part was with Zhuo Zhuo, who was currently helping Sakura and Jian Qinqi reconstruct their bodies. The other 5 were nowhere to be found. From the looks of it, Lin Chen's body had fused with one of the 5 Dragon Spring Veins. There was another copy in Enai Jiaming's hands, and Enai Jiaming was prepared to use the Dragon Spring Vein to save Lin Yi. It is precisely because Lin Chen has fused with the Dragon Spring Vein that he can resist the power of the 9 primordial divine seal. Enai Jiaming nodded and said, "Otherwise, he wouldn't have lived so long." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as if he had understood something. He finally realized why Lin Chen had said that he was very important to the clan, and that if anything happened to him, it would bring disaster to the clan. So he was someone who had fused with the dragon's spring vein. Is it easy to fuse with the dragon's spring vein? Nye Tian looked at Anai Jiaming and asked in a deep voice. If Lin Chen could fuse with the dragon's spring vein, then Lin Yi would definitely be able to as well. It seemed that according to Anai Jiaming, fusing with the dragon's spring vein was a very easy thing to do. Fusing with the dragon's spring vein requires a special method that only the protector clans can do. Anai Jiaming looked at Lin Yi and said, "So we must bring him back to the clan now." Anai Jiaming's words made Nye Tian furrow his brows. He then said, "Anai Jiaming, there are still some things that I haven't told you about the protector clans." "Is it about the betrayal of the protector clans?" Anai Jiaming asked with a frown. "You already know about it?" Nye Tian was stunned for a moment before he asked back. Anai Jiaming shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "I guessed it." Then, he continued, "Actually, I was the one who told the protector clans the method to fuse with the dragon's spring vein." Nye Tian was stunned for a moment before he understood something. He frowned and asked, "Anai Jiaming, you already knew that the protector clans would betray you. Why did you still tell them the method to fuse with the dragon's spring vein?" Anai Jiaming had divided the dragon's spring vein into 6 parts because he knew that the protector clans would betray him. Since he knew this, why did he tell the protector clans the method to fuse with the dragon's spring vein? Wasn't this equivalent to tempting the protector clans to betray him? And now, Anai Jiaming actually took the initiative to ask Lin Yi to fuse with the dragon's spring vein. Thinking of this, Nye Tian's expression changed. He had a guess in his mind. Anai Jiaming gave the dragon's spring vein to the protector clans because he wanted them to fuse with the dragon's spring vein. When this thought appeared, Lin Ye's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. Anai Jiaming couldn't help laughing when he saw the change in Nye Tian's expression. He said, "Nye Tian, you're right. The betrayal of the protector clans, including the protector clans fusing with the dragon's spring vein. These things are all within my expectations. But please believe me, I did it for a reason. The identity of those who fuse with the dragon's spring vein needs to change. There must be an envoy of the divine dragon among the protector clans. This is their destiny." After saying this, Anai Jiaming looked at Lin Yi with a firm gaze. Envoy of the divine dragon? Nye Tian couldn't help but be stunned when he heard this name. "Nye Tian, I don't have time to explain too much to you. There are many things that I still haven't completely remembered." Anai Jiaming frowned and said, "But I have a feeling that what I'm doing now is the right thing to do." Nye Tian looked at Anai Jiaming. He didn't know what to say. It seemed that Anai Jiaming had been playing a very big game of chess from the very beginning. The Divine Dragon Tribe, the Dragon Rebel Tribe, and the Protector clans were all important chess pieces in this game of chess. Even now, he, the person who set up the game, had become a chess piece on the chessboard. Nye Tian couldn't be sure if Anai Jiaming was trustworthy. At some point, he sensed something very clear in Anai Jiaming's eyes. He made up his mind and chose to believe in Anai Jiaming. "Nye Tian, he doesn't have much time left. We must leave immediately," Anai Jiaming said nervously as he pointed at Lin Yi. Nye Tian nodded and said, "Let's go now." Then, Nye Tian, Anai Jiaming, and the others quickly arrived at the entrance of the cave. Chapter 2232. Standing at the entrance of the cave, Nye Tian and the others couldn't help but stare blankly into the distance. Thousands of black-clothed martial artists were standing in the sky outside the cave. They looked like dark clouds that surrounded the entire Thousand Devil Mountain. These cultivators guarded the various entrances of the Thousand Demon Mountain, not daring to relax in the slightest. They were the Imperial Guard of the Dying Night Empire. They were ordered by the Emperor to seal off the entire Thousand Devil Mountain. It seems that the matter of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus has been exposed. Nye Tian frowned as he looked at the scene outside the cave. He knew that the matter of the Nine-Hearted Lotus would be discovered sooner or later. But he didn't expect it to be so serious. The Dying Night Empire valued the Nine-Hearted Lotus very much. They actually sent out the dying Knight Imperial Guard to surround the entire 1,000 Devil Mountain. There were 3,000 of them, and every one of them had the strength of a late-stage paramount god. The presence of so many experts at the same time was absolutely shocking. Inside the cave, Nietion's eyes focused on a black-clothed swordsman. His face darkened and he said, "This is bad. Even this guy is here. That black-clothed swordsman's aura is so strong. Who is he?" Enai Jiaming's expression changed slightly. "One of the 3 legendary swordsmen of the land of the Forsaken, Anya Minjia," Nietion said with a deep voice. His eyes were filled with worry. He didn't expect that Anya Minjia would also be here. "What should we do?" Nietion's face darkened. His mind was racing. With the strength of Nietion and Enai Jiaming, it was impossible for them to rush out. "It's a pity that Lord Di Shi isn't here." Enai Jiaming frowned and sighed. Nietion glanced at Enai Jiaming and didn't ask where Di Shi went. He thought for a moment and then locked his eyes on a person next to Anya Minjia. "Yi Chunli. I can only take a gamble." Nietion stared at Yi Chunli and made up his mind. He turned to Enai Jiaming and said, "You guys stay here. Don't go out." "Nietion, what are you doing?" Enai Jiaming could not help but ask in surprise when he saw that Nietion's expression was off. "Enai Jiaming, take Brother Lin Chen and take this opportunity to leave." Nietion smiled faintly. Then, his figure moved and he directly rushed out of the cave. Enai Jiaming and Lin Chen were stunned at the same time. Obviously, they did not expect Nietion to rush out directly. They wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Nietion's figure was already outside the cave. "Sir Dark Knight Sword Saint, long time no see." Nietion dashed out of the cave and hovered high up in the sky. He looked at Anya Minjia with a playful look on his face, as if nothing had happened. "Nietion." When Yi Chunli saw Nietion, he let out a weird cry and took a step forward. At the same time, the thousands of passing Night Star Guard up in the sky also took a step forward. Their vast and boundless energy surged toward Nietion like raging waves. But Nietion was not the least bit afraid. His body shook, and the sword energy around him surged violently, blocking the vast energy in the sky. Even though his opponents were 3,000 late paramount gods, it was not very likely that they would be able to crush Nietion with their energy. "Nietion, you're courting death," Yi Chunli roared. His figure suddenly moved, and he was actually about to attack. But at this moment, a low voice rang out, blocking Yi Chunli's way. It was Anya Minjia. "Master." Yi Chunli took a step back, looked at Anya Minjia, and called out respectfully. "How bold of you, Nietion," Anya Minjia said, staring coldly at Nietion. "I can't believe you dared to come out in the face of such a powerful force." Less than 2 months ago, when he had first met Nietion, the latter had been a peak-over god. Who could have guessed that he would be an early paramount god now? Furthermore, his energy seemed to be on the verge of breaking through to the mid-paramount god level. The speed at which he was advancing was terrifying. What was even stranger was that Yi Chunli had clearly told him that Nietion had entered the 5th level of the cave, but now he had emerged from the 6th. He had already searched through the 99th cave on the 5th level, and found nothing there. However, he didn't believe that Nietion could just vanish into thin air. Therefore, he had sent people to surround the entire 1,000 Devil Mountains. Just as he had expected, Nietion showed up again. He had no idea why Nietion had emerged from the 6th level of the cave. But that wasn't important anymore. What was important was that Nietion had shown up. "You sure have a lot of free time, Sword Sage Anya. You came all the way here to watch the show." With a playful smile, Nietion said, "I don't think Lord Sword Saint will fight me, will he?" Anya Minjia laughed coldly. "You don't need to provoke me, Nietion. Given my status, I don't want to fight you. Besides, the game is still going on. Of course I'll abide by the rules. As you can see, these people in front of you are all late paramount gods. Yang Qi said. That means we're all people who abide by the rules. Nie Tian nodded with a smile. Sword Sage Anya, you sure have a good aura. You really do abide by the rules. Sending out 3,000 late paramount gods wasn't a violation of the rules. But if all 3,000 of them were put together, even a peak god realm expert wouldn't be a match for them. Even if Nie Tian could kill one with one sword move, he would still die of exhaustion in the end. Without wasting any time, Anya Minjia said, Nie Tian, hand over the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. Nie Tian smiled. Sword Sage Anya, I did take the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus, but I don't want to hand it over. Upon hearing Nie Tian's words, Anya Minjia's eyes narrowed, and he said coldly, Brat, there are over 1,000 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses. You're really greedy to take them all. Greed is one of my strength. Nie Tian smiled. 9 extremities appeared in his hand. With a thought, he took out a 9 Hearts Demon Lotus and threw it to Anya Minjia. What do you mean? Anya Minjia caught the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus in surprise. He didn't understand what Nie Tian meant. Nothing, Nie Tian said with a faint smile. I just wanted you to confirm that I took all of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses. Then, holding the 9 extremities in his hand, he said, Sword Sage Anya, this thing in my hand is called the 9 extremities. It's a small world inside. All the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus are in there. Really? When Yi Chunli heard that all of the 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses were within the 9 extremities, his gaze, which was looking at the 9 extremities, instantly trembled. Your Highness, don't get excited. Nie Tian, however, laughed and said, 9 ultimates is marked with my soul imprints. I can destroy it with a single thought. As for the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus, it will be destroyed along with it. I don't think you want to see that. Chapter 2233. Yi Chunli's eyes trembled. He thought that Nie Tian was really going to destroy the 9 extremities. Nie Tian, however, had a calm smile on his face. Of course, he wasn't going to destroy the 9 extremities. The 9 Hearts Demon Lotus was inside. Moreover, the Pishio and the Golden Lion were still inside. He just wanted to prove that he had the ability to destroy the 9 extremities at any time. Nie Tian, what do you want? Just say it, Anya Minjia said calmly. He could tell that Nie Tian was just putting on an act when he threatened to destroy the 9 extremities. He was just asking for something. Lord Sword Sage, I can take out 109 Hearts Demon Lotuses right now in exchange for your word, Nie Tian said solemnly as he looked at Anya Minjia. Huh! Anya Minjia was stunned and asked, what word? Nie Tian's lips twitched and he said loudly, Enai Jiaming, come out. As soon as he finished speaking, Enai Jiaming and the others walked out of the cave. Anya Minjia glanced at Enai Jiaming and the others and was slightly stunned. He didn't pay much attention to them and said directly, You want me to let them go, right? Lord Sword Sage is indeed smart. Nie Tian nodded with a smile and said, As long as you guarantee that they can leave safely, I will immediately take out 109 Hearts Demon Lotuses. How about that? Teacher, agree to it, Yi Chunli said in a low voice. He was extremely tempted. In his opinion, Enai Jiaming and the others were completely dispensable. He didn't care about them at all. What he cared about was the 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses and Nie Tian. As long as Nie Tian and the 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses were there, it didn't matter whether the others died or not. 109 Hearts Demon Lotuses were only 1/10 of the total number of 9 Hearts Demon Lotuses. But for Yi Chunli it was very tempting. After all, he could really get the 109 Hearts Demon Lotuses. If Nie Tian was really cornered, he might destroy the 9 ultimate. If that happened, wouldn't they lose everything? Anya Minjia glared at Yi Chunli coldly. Obviously, he did not like the latter making decisions for him. After thinking for a moment, he said heavily, Nie Tian, I agree to your conditions. Very good. Nie Tian lightly smiled. With a thought, he opened his palm, and one by one, the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus appeared. Very quickly, there were 100 of them floating in the air. He directly pushed the 109 heart demonic lotuses to Anya Minjia and said, "Sword Sage, you shouldn't be the kind of villain who goes back on his word." Anya Minjia took all the 9 hearts demonic lotuses and said cold, "Nia Tian, you are underestimating me. Let them go." Anya Minjia bellowed and waved his hand in the air. The passing night royal guards in the sky moved and opened up a path. "Anai Jiaming, you guys can leave." Nia Tian turned to look at Anai Jiaming and said with a faint smile, "Don't worry, I will be fine." Anai Jiaming frowned. Apparently, he did not expect that Nia Tian would do this. "Brother Nia Tian, you." Lin Chen's little face was full of worry, and she couldn't help crying. "Lin Chen, I told you, you are a man. You shouldn't cry." Nia Tian laughed, not the slightest bit nervous. Then, he sent a voice transmission to Anai Jiaming, saying, "Anai Jiaming, now is not the time to hesitate. Go and do what you need to do. I am also looking forward to seeing what kind of person the Divine Dragon Messenger you mentioned is." It seemed that Anai Jiaming wanted to use the Dragon Spring Vein to create the Divine Dragon Messenger. Only those who integrated with the Dragon Spring Vein could become the Divine Dragon Messenger. "Okay, we are leaving. Take care of yourself." Seeing the determination in Nye Tian's eyes, Anai Jiaming no longer hesitated. After a heavy nod, he left with Lin Chen and Lin Yi. In the air, Lin Chen took out the strange blackbird from the spiritual pet belt. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the distance. Nye Tian knew that the strange blackbird was very fast, and that Anai Jiaming and the others were safe. Then, he looked at Anya Minjia and the others. Next, it was time to think about how he was going to leave. "You really are an interesting person, Nye Tian," Anya Minjia said. "At a time like this, you are still thinking about your friends. Not everyone has that kind of breadth of mind." Anya Minjia smiled faintly, then said in a cold tone, "I am very curious. How are you going to leave this place?" There were 3,000 late-stage paramount gods in front of Nye Tian. Furthermore, they were the Imperial Guard of the Dying Night Empire, and were far stronger than ordinary late-stage paramount gods. Given Nye Tian's current battle prowess, dealing with a dozen at once was already his limit. It was no exaggeration to say that 3,000 passing Night Imperial Guard would be enough to kill Nye Tian with a single move. Exalted Sword Sage, it was a pleasant deal. Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, "Why don't we make another deal now? What do you think?" Anya Minjia smiled cold, killing intent flickering in his eyes. "Given the current situation, do I really need to make a deal with you? You seem to have forgotten that I still have a lot of 9 hearts Demon Lotus," Exalted Sword Sage. Nye Tian frowned as he reminded Anya Minjia. "Humph." Anya Minjia chuckled coldly. "You probably don't know how important you are, Nye Tian. I'll tell you the truth. As long as I can kill you, I won't take a single 9 hearts Demon Lotus. Right now, I already have 109 hearts Demon Lotus. That's enough." Nye Tian frowned. He hadn't expected Anya Minjia to say such a thing. But a moment later, he calmed down and smiled. "Exalted Sword Sage, are you really so confident that you can kill me? 3,000 late-stage paramount gods? You won't be able to escape." Anya Minjia smiled cold, his killing intent surging. "Who said I was going to escape?" Nye Tian laughed. Looking at the cave behind him, he said, "This 1,000 Devil Mountain is my best defense. Once I enter the cave, I'd like to ask, how many of these 3,000 warriors will be able to enter?" Anya Minjia's eyes narrowed. He had forgotten about that. Nye Tian had just come out of the 6th level. If he went back and hid there, it would be very safe. Of the 3,000 passing Night Imperial Guard, not a single one would be able to enter the 6th level. Only Yi Chunli alone barely had the chance to enter the 6th level of the cave. "Tell me about your deal, Nye Tian," Anya Minjia said without the slightest hesitation. Actually, if Nye Tian had returned to the cave, he could have already sent people to guard it. but he didn't want to do that. He was curious as to what kind of deal Nyetian would propose. A determined smile appeared at the corner of Nyetian's mouth as he said in a loud voice, "Lord Sword Saint, I want a fair duel." "A fair duel? With whom?" Onyeminjia asked, looking surprised. "With this guy next to you, the one who once tried to kill me with a single sword strike." Nyetian spun around and pointed at Yichenli. Chapter 2234. As Nyetian's voice faded, a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. His cold eyes were fixed on Yichenli. When Yichenli had fought Nyetian for the first time, he'd boasted that if he couldn't kill Nyetian in one move, he wouldn't make another move. But this guy had been too shameless. He hadn't been able to kill Nyetian in one move, so he'd let someone else do it instead. Nyetian hadn't forgotten about that. That was why he wanted to fight Yichenli to the death. Onyeminjia's eyes narrowed when he heard Nyetian's words. He was clearly surprised. He hadn't expected that the deal Nyetian was talking about was a fight to the death with Yichenli. "Nyetian, you want to fight me to the death?" Yichenli's gaze suddenly shook, and he actually seemed to be slightly surprised. At the same time, he revealed a wisp of terror that couldn't be concealed. "What? Are you afraid?" Nyetian saw Yichenli's reaction and couldn't help but sneer, extremely provocative. Onyeminjia could sense Yichenli's nervousness, and his face darkened. "Are you nervous, Chenli?" he said coldly. He didn't understand Yichenli's reaction. Yichenli was his disciple, and he knew exactly how strong he was. Even though Yichenli had destroyed his own martial arts foundation, and his strength had dropped, his battle prowess was still far beyond that of an ordinary peak paramount god. On top of that, Yichenli was a peak swordsman, and his overall battle prowess was even more terrifying. On the other hand, Nyetian was only an early paramount god, and his sword Dao was only at the elementary level. Onyeminjia didn't understand why Yichenli would be scared in such a situation. He knew that Yichenli was a proud person. Even in the face of opponents stronger than him, he'd never been afraid. But now, facing someone weaker than him, he was actually scared. That was a little hard to understand. "Master, this kid's strength is very strange," Yichenli said, his eyes trembling. Yichenli's gaze trembled, and he said with an embarrassed expression, "There is an extremely terrifying rune in his body that can allow him to instantly increase his strength. Back when he was a peak godlord, he could unleash those magical symbols to push him to the level of a late paramount god. He's already an early paramount god," Yang Qi thought. "Once he activates the magical symbols, he'll be as strong as a peak paramount god." At this point, Yichenli suddenly looked at Nyetian. His gaze was even more nervous as he said, "There's one more thing. His martial physique is extremely terrifying. It's practically abnormal. Previously, when he was heavily injured, he took a direct hit from my sword. And that sword actually didn't kill him." After hearing what Yichenli had to say, the way Onyeminjia looked at Nyetian also changed slightly. He did not expect that Nyetian's strength was actually so formidable that it made Yichenli so apprehensive. Although he had seen Nyetian before, he had not seen the latter fight with his own eyes. As far as he was concerned, someone who had just become a paramount god wouldn't be able to do much. However, Yichenli's current attitude had caused his opinion of Nyetian to change somewhat. "So, Yichenli, it seems you won't accept the challenge?" Nyetian said, chuckling coldly and looking at Yichenli with a look of contempt. He hadn't expected Yichenli to be so scared. Who could have guessed that someone as arrogant as Yang Qi would be so cautious? "How about this? I can guarantee that I won't be as strong as a peak paramount god. Okay?" Nyetian smiled playfully. "Really?" Hearing Nyetian's words, Yichenli's gaze couldn't help but tremble, and his eyes became blazing hot. His biggest fear of Nyetian was that Nyetian might unleash those magical symbols and break through to the peak paramount god level. He knew that if Nie Tian broke through to the peak paramount god level, he would be far stronger than any ordinary warrior. Do I look like I'm joking? Nie Tian said, chuckling mockingly. Yi Chunli was a peak sword martial expert, and yet he was acting so cowardly. How embarrassing! All right. At this moment, Anya Minjia's voice rang out. Since that's the case, I agree to this battle on behalf of Yi Chunli. Given the circumstances, Anya Minjia wouldn't be able to stand by and watch Yi Chunli cower. After all, he was Yi Chunli's teacher. If his disciple were to cower, he would lose face. You don't have any objections, do you, Yi Chunli? Nie Tian asked provocatively. If you want to fight, Nie Tian, then I'll take you on. Yi Chunli growled. Since Anya Minjia had agreed, he had no choice but to put his life on the line. If Nie Tian had kept his strength at the level of a late paramount god, then he would have been more confident in his chances. Excellent. Nie Tian smiled confidently, then looked at Anya Minjia and said, Exalted Sword Sage, let's fight to the death. If I lose or die, everything I have will belong to you. But if I win, I won't kill Yi Chunli. But you have to let me go unconditionally. That's a fair deal, right? Anya Minjia's mouth curled into a strange smile as he nodded in agreement. He had been very confident in Yi Chunli's strength, but Yi Chunli's reaction just now had disappointed him. At this moment, he couldn't help but look forward to seeing how powerful Nie Tian's battle prowess was. Very good. Nie Tian smiled. Exalted Sword Sage is one of the 3 legendary swordsmen in the land of the Forsaken. He stands at the peak of the sword world. And I, Nie Tian, am just a junior in the sword Dao. Given your status, Exalted Sword Sage, you won't go back on your word, will you? Anya Minjia's expression darkened. There's no need to be sarcastic, Nie Tian. I, Anya Minjia, am a proud swordsman. I won't go back on my word with a junior like you. That's good. Nie Tian smiled faintly, looking proud. Anya Minjia's identity was to get a guarantee from Yi Chunli. Since Anya Minjia could set foot at the peak of the sword world, it meant that he was a swordsman and wouldn't go back on his word. Anya Minjia looked coldly at Nie Tian. He waved his hand, and the 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards in the sky all retreated, creating a space of tens of thousands of meters. Brat, I'd like to see how strong you are to be so confident, Anya Minjia said cold, staring at Nie Tian. At this moment, Yi Chunli took a step forward and leaped into the sky. He looked at Nie Tian and said cold, Come on. As you wish. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He moved and came to the sky, standing opposite Yi Chunli. Nie Tian, you'll definitely lose this battle. Yi Chunli's eyes were as gloomy as water. He growled, and the sword momentum of his body rose. Nie Tian had a playful look on his face. He twitched his mouth and murmured, Sorry, I'll definitely win this battle. Chapter 2235. Boom! Boom! High up in the sky, 2 enormous sword auras surged at the same time. The swift and fierce auras seemed to be able to tear the world apart. Nie Tian and Yi Chunli stood in the void like 2 giant swords, constantly releasing extremely violent sword essences. Bang! Before the 2 of them made a move, the 2 sword auras collided in the air. The entire world seemed to shake. That silver-haired kid's sword aura is so strong. He can actually fight head-on with the Crown Prince. The eyes of the 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards lit up, and they looked extremely shocked. They knew how terrifying Yi Chunli was, but they did not expect that Nie Tian's sword aura was no weaker than Yi Chunli's. There was no doubt that this battle would be very exciting. This kid's sword essence is so terrifying. On the other side, Anya Minjia's expression also changed as he thought to himself. What he was concerned about was not Nie Tian's sword aura, but his sword essence. He knew that Nie Tian was a beginner-level swordsman, but his sword essence was no weaker than Yi Chunli's. In fact, it was even stronger. This was very terrifying. Yi Chunli was a peak swordsman, and his swordsmanship realm was much higher than Nie Tion's. Under such circumstances, Nie Tion's sword essence was actually stronger than Yi Chunli's. One could imagine how high the quality of his sword essence was. Yi Chunli was a top-notch swordsman in the entire abandoned land. The quality of his sword essence was already very terrifying. However, compared to Nie Tion, his sword essence was much weaker. If this kid's swordsmanship realm was the same as mine, his sword essence would definitely crush mine, Anya Minjia thought to himself as his eyes flickered coldly. As a swordsman, he naturally did not want to admit that his sword essence was weaker than others. However, when facing Nie Tion, he had to admit it. He had met countless swordsmen in his life, including many swordsmanship masters. However, in terms of the terrifying sword essence, Nie Tion was undoubtedly the best. It's hard to imagine that there is such a terrifying swordsman in the world. Anya Minjia was shocked and the corners of his mouth twitched. Before meeting Nie Tion, Anya Minjia found it hard to believe that there was such a terrifying sword intent in the world. He didn't know why Nie Tion was able to nurture such a powerful sword intent. Nie Tion, die. Right at this moment, Yi Chunli's voice rang out. Li Yuan slashed down ferociously, and a sword shadow descended diagonally like a dark mountain, smashing towards Nie Tion. All of a sudden, Nie Tion looked up and unleashed forbidden magical symbols, causing his energy to skyrocket as his cultivation base rose to the late paramount god level. Nie Tion's lips twitched as he thought, I was right. Now that I've lowered the level of the warding talisman, I'm only as strong as a late paramount god. After being purified by the saint's aura, the forbidden technique rune's rank dropped to advanced yellow class. Even though Nie Tion was an early paramount god, the forbidden technique rune only pushed him to the late paramount god level. He had just told Yi Chunli that he would limit his strength to the late paramount god level. However, the truth was that he would only be able to push himself to the late paramount god level. If Yi Chunli knew that, he would probably go mad with rage. What strange magical symbols! Anya Minjia's eyes flickered with astonishment as he sensed that Nie Tion's cultivation base had risen by 2 stages. Although Yi Chunli had told him that Nie Tion had strange magical symbols inside of him that could be used to boost his strength, Anya Minjia still hadn't believed it. But in his heart, he did not believe it. Now that he saw it with his own eyes, he finally believed it. This brat really has a lot of secrets. No wonder that Exalted One wanted to see him. Anya Minjia looked at Nie Tion with a bit of worry in his eyes. If Nie Tion defeated Yi Chunli, would Anya Minjia really let Nie Tion go? Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor, activate. Next, something completely shocking happened. Nie Tion stood in place, and instead of fighting back, he simply let out a growl. Immediately after, a layer of dazzling white light surged from his body, condensing into a white armor around his body. Nie Tion was now an early paramount god, and his 9 polarity war god incantation had reached the 8th division, the Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor. He wasn't going to fight back, but rather defend. He wanted to see exactly how strong the 8th division of the 9 polarity war god incantation was. Are you looking to die? Yi Chunli shouted when he saw that Nie Tion wasn't moving, and his eyes flickered with killing intent. Suddenly, the sword in front of him began to shine with terrifying black light. As far as he was concerned, if Nie Tion didn't fight back, he would be courting death. He simply couldn't believe that Nie Tion could rely on pure defense to survive this attack. Rumble! In the next moment, the black sword descended like a waterfall onto the Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor. A massive boom rang out, and everything seemed to go still for a moment. The black sword pierced through the Bright Young Heaven Battle Armor, and the light on its edge almost touched Nie Tion. Astral Soul Shield, activate! In that moment, Nie Tion let out a low growl, and boundless astral power poured out of him, forming a shield of starlight around him. A muffled boom rang out, and Nie Tion was sent flying backward. Hovering in midair, He unfurled his astral soul wings and flapped them to stabilize himself. "He's not dead," Yichunli said, his eyes trembling as he looked at Nye Tian, his face drained of blood. How could he ever have imagined that Nye Tian would be completely fine after taking his sword head-on? "Yichunli, that sword attack of yours isn't very impressive." Nye Tian suddenly lifted his head and smiled faintly. His voice was extremely ear-piercing when it reached Yichunli's ears. At this moment, he couldn't say that he was completely fine. At the very least, there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. That sword attack just now had caused him some minor injuries. Yichunli's strength was still very terrifying. Fortunately, Nye Tian was prepared and had activated the astral soul shield at the crucial moment. Otherwise, he might have been seriously injured. It had to be said that the 8th tier of the 9 extremities war god incantation, the bright Yang heaven battle armor, was very freakish. It had almost blocked Yichunli's sword. One had to know that Yichunli was a martial artist who was even more terrifying than the average peak paramount god. His sword could kill an ordinary peak paramount god in the blink of an eye. Nye Tian had only relied on the bright Yang heaven battle armor to withstand most of the attack. This was very terrifying. Because of this, Yichunli's expression was so shocked. Yichunli wasn't the only one who was shocked. The 3,000 dying Night Guardsmen and Anya Minjia were also shocked. Especially Anya Minjia, whose facial features were all twisted together. Previously, Yichunli had told him that Nye Tian's martial body was freakishly strong. At first, he had wondered how freakishly strong an early-stage paramount god could be. But now he knew that Nye Tian's martial body was definitely stronger than most peak paramount gods. But now Nye Tian was only an early-stage paramount god. At this moment, Nye Tian's status in Anya Minjia's heart rose by a large margin. The strongest sword intent, the strongest martial body. Chapter 2236. Yichunli, it's time for me to make a move. In the sky, Nye Tian looked at Yichunli and smiled coldly. His eyes were cold. Yichunli suddenly raised his head. When he saw Nye Tian's gaze, his body trembled involuntarily. At this moment, under Nye Tian's gaze, he actually felt that he was like a helpless little lamb. "Are you afraid?" Nye Tian saw Yichunli's reaction clearly and couldn't help but laugh coldly. Originally, he thought that Yichunli would be a decent opponent. He didn't expect the other party to be so cowardly. Yichunli was so cowardly that he was in his mother's womb. Before Nye Tian made a move, he was already terrified. Godly sword. Then, Nye Tian didn't hesitate at all and slashed with his sword. The shadow of the sword fell from the sky, and the brilliance of the sword suddenly blossomed. The space within tens of thousands of meters was filled with a terrifying sword intent. Yichunli felt threatened and immediately reacted. The Abyss Silence sword was raised high, and a shadow of the sword was also blasted out. Boom! 2 sword shadows, one bright and one dark, collided with each other in the air like 2 wild beasts. In an instant, heaven and earth were silent, and the space also shook a little. But it was obvious that the sword of light was stronger. Yichunli's figure suddenly retreated in the sky, and he was forced to thousands of meters away. Before he could stabilize his body, a huge shadow of the sword appeared in the sky again and pressed down on him. Nye Tian didn't give Yichunli any chance to catch his breath. He attacked continuously and crazily. Yichunli activated the Dark Night devouring power in his body, and together with his Abyss Silence sword intent, he could barely protect himself. At this moment, when the passing Night Imperial Guards saw the scene in the sky, their expressions were extremely shocked, as if they didn't dare to believe their eyes. How could they possibly think that the dignified passing Night Crown Prince would actually be beaten by Nye Tian to the point where he couldn't retaliate? What's going on? His Highness is actually not this silver-haired brat's opponent. Why isn't His Highness fighting back? Isn't his bloodline power very strong? His Highness the Crown Prince must be waiting for an opportunity to kill this brat in one strike. The guards discussed in low voices. Even though Yi Chunli was already completely suppressed by Nie Tian, there were still people who felt that Yi Chunli was stronger than Nie Tian. How is this possible? On the other side, Anya Minjia's aged face was extremely ugly. He roared furiously in his heart. He was simply unwilling to believe the scene before him. He was a grandmaster figure in the way of the sword, so how could he not see that the current Yi Chunli was already in a state of absolute defeat without any chance of turning things around? To put it bluntly, Nie Tian was basically playing with Yi Chunli right now. As long as he was willing, he could kill Yi Chunli with a single slash at any time. Anya Minjia originally thought that even if Yi Chunli didn't have 100% chance of winning against Nie Tian, he would at least have a 70 to 80% chance of winning. But now, the scene before him had completely destroyed the hope in his heart. Nie Tian's strength completely crushed Yi Chunli's. Up in the sky, Nie Tian's eyes glittered with fierce light, and his sword will surged around him. He hadn't expected the current situation to be like this. He had originally thought that if he wanted to defeat Yi Chunli, he would definitely have to fight a bloody battle. However, the current situation was much more optimistic than he had anticipated. He couldn't even figure out if Yi Chunli had suddenly become weaker, or if his own strength had increased by too much. According to his original expectations, even if he had become an early paramount god, he shouldn't have been this strong. But he didn't have time to think too much. His eyes flickered with cold light, and he shouted, "Yi Chunli, the next sword strike will decide who's going to win." Yi Chunli retreated repeatedly, and the sword intent all over his body had already been suppressed to an extremely small area. When he saw the look in Nie Tian's eyes, his heart trembled, and he felt like he had been plunged into an icehouse. Almost subconsciously, he shouted, "Nie Tian, I concede." "Concede?" Nie Tian laughed, the corners of his mouth twitching involuntarily. He hadn't expected this at all. This battle had been surprisingly easy. Yi Chunli's sudden surrender stunned the 3,000 passing Night Star Guards, who were hundreds of thousands of meters away, and they were collectively petrified. Especially those who had been hoping that Yi Chunli would suddenly erupt and turn the situation around. These Star Guards couldn't understand this battle at all. From beginning to end, they felt that it was inconceivable. From the beginning to the end, other than the sword strike at the beginning, Yi Chunli was pressed to the ground and crushed by Nie Tian. This kind of result was too shocking, it was impossible to accept. Anya Minjia was stunned for a long time before he came to his senses. His expression was so ugly that it looked like he had been slapped dozens of times. Originally, he had regarded Yi Chunli as the disciple he was most proud of. But now, this disciple that he was most proud of had done things that made him lose face one after another. First, he was afraid to fight, and then he had conceded. Each time, he was more and more cowardly than the last. "Yi Chunli, looks like I overestimated you in the past." Nie Tian's figure moved and retreated thousands of meters away. He looked at Yi Chunli with disdain and said loudly, "This battle was much easier than I expected." Ha! Insolent laughter resounded in the void, and it was like a series of resounding slaps that landed on Yi Chunli's face. Although this battle was a life-and-death battle, Nie Tian had said before that if he won, he wouldn't kill Yi Chunli. Yi Chunli's expression was ugly, and the muscles at the corners of his eyes were trembling. He roared angrily, "Nie Tian, if I hadn't destroyed my martial foundation, how could you be my opponent?" At this moment, he was so angry that he wished he could cut Nie Tian into 1,000 pieces. In order to kill Nie Tian, he destroyed his martial foundation. But now, he wasn't Nie Tian's opponent. How could he accept such a thing? "Yi Chunli, are you blaming me?" Before Nie Tian could say anything, Anya Minjia's voice rang out. The reason why Yi Chunli destroyed his martial foundation was that Anya Minjia had asked him to do so. Anya Minjia was unhappy that Yi Chunli had shouted such a thing. This disciple doesn't dare. Yi Chunli's eyes trembled. He knew that he had said something wrong and immediately knelt down in fear. You better not dare. Anya Minjia replied coldly. Then, he looked at Nye Tian and said, Nye Tian, your strength has indeed exceeded my expectations. Even if you stand on the opposite side of me now, I have to admit that you are the most talented swordsman I have ever seen. Lord Sword Sage, I don't need you to judge whether my talent in swordsmanship is strong or not. Nye Tian smiled faintly. His eyes flickered slightly, and he said directly, This junior only wants to ask one thing. Can I leave now? His calm voice contained some arrogance, some provocation, and some calmness. You took the Yi clan's things and still want to leave. However, at this time, a deep and powerful voice rang out in the void. It had an extremely strong and oppressive aura. Are you dreaming? Chapter 2237. Nye Tian could not help but frown as he stared at the black-robed figure above the void. It was an old man with wrinkles all over his aged face. His body was short and stooped, and he looked like a withered leaf in the wind as he stood there. Even so, his presence was extremely frightening, with a layer of dark aura vaguely flowing around his body. Although that dark aura did not appear to be powerful, it was like an ocean when perceived carefully, vast and endless. Judging from his presence alone, the black-robed elder's ability did not seem to be beneath Anya Minjia. At the moment, the black-robed elder's face was dark, his cold eyes staring fixedly at Nye Tian. Ancestor! Yi Chunli abruptly looked at the black-robed elder and cried out in surprise, his eyes filled with delight. The three ancestors of Death Knight. Anya Minjia frowned as well. He actually did not notice that there was a person hiding in the void. Even so, he quickly recognized who it was. It was one of the three ancestors of Death Knight of the Death Knight Empire. The Death Knight Empire was extremely powerful, having three ancestor-level characters who were collectively known as the three ancestors of Death Knight. It was rumored that the three ancestors of Death Knight were all demi-saints. That elder has such a powerful presence. What level of champion is he? Nye Tian's gaze trembled as he stared at the black-robed elder, his heart filled with shock. That old man is similar to Anya Minjia, and should be a demi-saint. That was when Fat Cat's voice rang with a somber tone. Demi-saint. Nye Tian did a double-take before asking, What level is that, Fat? Before this, Nye Tian had already learned about the demi-saint realm. Not too long ago, he had even heard Fat Cat mention a demi-saint. And now, another demi-saint had appeared. He could not help but feel a little confused. Nye Tian, now that you've asked, I'll tell you about it, Nye Tian said. Fat Cat frowned. Actually, there are three intermediate levels between the pinnacle of Overgod and Saint. Demi-saint, demi-saint and demi-saint. 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 False saint. Nye Tian's eyes flickered when he heard little Fat Cat's words, and he secretly remembered the three realms. The Fat Cat nodded. Half-sages are people who are far stronger than peak paramount gods. However, there's a huge gap between them and sages. For example, Ming Jianyu. Ming Jianyu, the Yin Moon Emperor, and the Dark Azura deity are all half-saints. As for demi-saints, they are the champions who are extremely close to becoming saints. The three legendary swordsmen and the old man in front of you are all demi-saints. As for pseudo-holiness, it's a little more complicated. Pseudo-saints, as the name suggests, are false saints. Pseudo-saints. Although they are pseudo-saints, they are still stronger than demi-saint. That's because pseudo-saints are already able to produce sage chi, and possess strength comparable to sages. The only difference is that they are unable to release sacred light. Holy light is the light of a saint. This is the symbol of a saint. Only those who possess the holy light are true saints. Pseudo-saints are pseudo-saints precisely because they do not have the holy light. After saying that, Little Fat Cat nodded and did not say anything else. Nie Tion's gaze was quivering. Although the Fat Cat's words left him very shocked, he was already very clear. Demi-saint, and pseudo-saint. The three tiers in between were each more powerful than the last. It was especially true for pseudo-saints, who almost had the combat ability of a saint. The only difference was that they did not have the holy light. Fat, is that mysterious person a pseudo-saint? Nie Tion could not help asking when he suddenly remembered the mysterious person. Anya Minjia and the others were all demi-saints. On the other hand, the mysterious person had taken on a combined blow from both Anya Minjia and Guangwu Fengyan, and was clearly more powerful. That was why Nie Tion really wanted to know if the mysterious person was a pseudo-saint. I don't know. Unexpectedly, the Fat Cat shook its head and said, that mysterious person is definitely more powerful than Anya Minjia and the others, but I can't be sure if he has reached the threshold of pseudo-saint. Nie Tion was taken aback for a moment. It appeared that the Fat Cat's senses could not differentiate between demi-saints and pseudo-saint. But he was now certain that pseudo-saints were the pinnacle champions of the Forsaken Lands. There were probably not many pseudo-saints in the entire Forsaken Land. Nie Tion's expression could not help but darken after confirming the black-robed elder's ability. That elder clearly did not come with good intentions. He had no intention of letting Nie Tion leave, and was instead intent on keeping Nie Tion here. Yi Chunli addressed the elder as elder, which meant that the latter was clearly someone from the Dead Knight Empire, and was probably here for the Nine Hearts Bewitching Lotus. Lord Sword Saint, please leave. Leave the matters here to this old man. That was when the Dead Knight Ancestor looked at Anya Minjia and said flatly with a smile, "What do you mean, Your Excellency?" Anya Minjia was aware of the Dead Knight Ancestor's identity, but he did not recognize him. He smiled coldly and said in a low voice, The Dead Knight Ancestor could tell that Anya Minjia's tone was displeased, and his eyes narrowed as he smiled and said, Lord Sword Saint, are you really going to let this kid go? Of course. Anya Minjia laughed loudly and said, This is an agreement between me and him. Do you think that I would go back on my word? The Dead Knight Ancestor's face darkened, clearly not expecting that Anya Minjia would have such an attitude. Nie Tion's eyes fell on Anya Minjia, and the corner of his mouth could not help but curl up. He had not misjudged Anya Minjia. The latter had the demeanor of a swordsman. Lord Sword Saint, this old man knows what you are thinking. The Dead Knight Ancestor smiled sinisterly and said, If you are afraid that what happened just now will be leaked, this old man can personally kill 3,000 Dead Knight Imperial Guards. As for Yi Chunli, he will not say a word. As for this old man, I will not even leave the Dead Knight Empire, let alone say anything. Lord Sword Saint, what do you think of this old man's suggestion? His voice was not loud, but it resounded in everyone's ears like a clap of thunder. The 3,000 Dead Knight Imperial Guards, in particular, turned pale with fright. In order to help Anya Minjia keep the secret, the Dead Knight Ancestor was going to kill them all. Are you insulting me by saying this? Anya Minjia growled and said, I, Anya Minjia, do not think that I am a good person. However, I also have my own principles. Let me be a villain who goes back on his word. Sorry, I, Anya Minjia, can't do that. His ice-cold words were loud and clear, sonorous and forceful. The Dead Knight Ancestor's face darkened again. He did not expect that his words would directly provoke Anya Minjia. He had originally thought that Anya Minjia was worried about his reputation, so he wanted to let Nie Tion go. However, it now seemed that Anya Minjia was an extremely principled person who took his promises very seriously. Lord Sword Saint, this kid is someone that the person behind you wants. Are you really going to let him go? The Dead Knight Ancestor's eyes were extremely gloomy as he asked in a deep voice. It was obvious that he wanted to use the person behind Anya Minjia to suppress him. Chapter 2238. Tian looked at Anya Minjia and couldn't help but smile. He hadn't expected things to turn out this way. Teacher, this. Yichunli was stunned. He looked at Anya Minjia in confusion and didn't know what to say. Sir Sword Sage, what if I insist on killing this guy? The dead knight ancestor's tone became cold. You can try. Anya Minjia responded cold. He took a step forward and released a terrifying sword momentum that shot up to the sky, causing dark clouds to roll. Anya Minjia's action was very threatening. Obviously, he was really angry at this moment. If the dead knight ancestor continued to force him, he would definitely attack. Anya Minjia, don't force me. The dead knight ancestor didn't give in. He moved and a dark aura rose from his body, covering the whole area. The surrounding space immediately became dark. You're forcing me. Anya Minjia's eyes were dark. He was ready to attack. This. Tian was speechless. It would be funny if Anya Minjia and the dead knight ancestor fought. The dead knight ancestor's eyes trembled. He didn't expect Anya Minjia to be so tough. In his opinion, what Anya Minjia was doing was so stupid that he couldn't understand it. Anya Minjia was here to kill Tian, but now he wanted to protect Tian. Was it worth it for the so-called promise and trust? The dead knight ancestor and Anya Minjia were two completely different people. Some people thought that promises were bullsh*t and worthless, but some people thought that promises were everything and more valuable than life. Sir Sword Sage. The dead knight ancestor's eyes trembled, but he didn't attack. He said, I'll give you face today. Then, he looked at Tian and said, Boy, you're very lucky. Now, as long as you hand over the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus, you can get lost. Hand over the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus? Tian was startled for a moment, then he smiled and said, Did I hear wrong? According to our previous agreement, as long as I defeat Yichunli, I will be able to leave immediately. May I ask, why should I hand over the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus? When Forefather Death Knight heard Tian's words, his face suddenly darkened. He didn't expect that Tian would still dare to push his luck even after he made such a big concession. Allowing Tian to leave this place alive was already the most lenient old ancestor Dead Knight could be. Tian actually wanted to leave with the 9 Hearts Demon Lotus. That was simply a dream. Brat, don't challenge my patience. Old ancestor Passing Knight spoke sternly. His old face was incomparably hideous, and it was almost impossible to tell that he was human. I can't be bothered with you. Old ancestor Death Knight was extremely furious, but Tian still had a calm expression. After a faint smile, he directly said to Anya Minjia, Senior Sword Sage, according to our previous agreement, I can leave directly. Anya Minjia frowned. He didn't expect Tian to be so calm and so arrogant. However, he knew that what Tian said just now was not wrong. At this moment, he finally realized how smart Tian was. When Tian made the agreement with him, he specifically stated that as long as he defeated Yichunli and didn't kill him, he could leave unconditionally. Therefore, according to the agreement, Tian could leave directly. What a cunning brat! It seems that I have been used by you, Anya Minjia said darkly in his heart, but he couldn't show it on the surface. Who asked him to promise Tian? Now, no matter what the result was, he could only grit his teeth and swallow it. Tian, leave. Anya Minjia frowned and said in a cold tone, We'll meet again, Lord Sword Saint. With a complacent smile, Tian blurred into action and prepared to leave. Stop him. However, at this moment, old ancestor Death Knight roared angrily, completely ignoring Anya Minjia. Yes. The 3,000 Passing Knight Imperial Guards responded in unison. Their voices were like thunder. In the next moment, thousands of figures moved at the same time. Like dark clouds pressing down from the sky, they shrouded Tian. Who dares to move? Almost at the same time, Anya Minjia suddenly roared. Then, his body shook, and a terrifying sword essence was released. It turned into a wave of sword essence that could be seen by the naked eye and spread into the sky. Boom! Waves of sword essence filled the air like raging waves. The 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards were hit by the wave of sword essence. Their aura collapsed and their figures were sent flying in all directions. Nie Tian was shocked at the scene before him. The power of a demi-saint was truly terrifying. A single wave of sword essence was enough to scatter 3,000 late-stage supreme gods. And Nie Tian knew that Anya Minjia was being merciful. Otherwise, the 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards would have been crushed into mincemeat by the sword essence. "Thank you, Sword Sage." Nie Tian smiled and flapped his wings, flying up into the sky. Old Ancestor Death Knight looked at Nie Tian from afar. His face was so dark that it was dripping blood, but he did not dare to make a move. Seeing Nie Tian's figure disappear, Yichunli looked stunned and could not help but shout, "Old Ancestor, why didn't you make a move and kill that brat?" "Shut up!" Old Ancestor Death Knight roared and glared at Yichunli cold. Of course, he wanted to stop Nie Tian, but he did not dare. That was because he knew that a terrifying person was hiding behind Nie Tian. Yichunli could make a move, and so could the 3,000 passing Knight Imperial Guards, but Old Ancestor Death Knight could not. If he made a move, he would be breaking the rules. This small action could bring about a calamity to the Dead Knight Empire. Old Ancestor Death Knight had heard that the person behind Nie Tian was a pseudo-saint. Even the Dead Knight Empire could not afford to offend a pseudo-saint. No one knew where this pseudo-saint was. Perhaps he was right beside Nie Tian. Old Ancestor Death Knight did not dare to risk the entire Dead Knight Empire. The loss of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus was indeed a heavy blow to the Dead Knight Empire, but it was not fatal. If they offended a pseudo-saint, it would be a disaster. That was why Old Ancestor Death Knight would rather watch Nie Tian leave than make a move. On the other side, Anya Minjia looked at Nie Tian's back with an extremely ugly expression. A moment later, he moved and left. Letting Nie Tian go, he had to quickly explain to the person behind him. Seeing that Anya Minjia had left, Yichunli asked Old Ancestor Death Knight with an ugly expression, "Old Ancestor, what should we do?" "Humph humph humph." Suddenly, Old Ancestor Death Knight laughed sinisterly. A cold arc appeared at the corner of his mouth, and he said, "Stinking brat, do you really think you can escape? Old Ancestor, that brat has already gone far away. I reckon he has already left the Burial Cloud mountain range," Yichunli said with a puzzled expression. "Trash!" Old Ancestor Death Knight rebuked angrily and said, "Do I need you to remind me? Do you think I'm senile?" "No, I don't dare." Yichunli's face was pale with fright, and he quickly lowered his head. "Brat, you absorbed the power of the Nine Flames Demon Lotus. Before the Lotus aura completely disappears, I can find you even if you run to the ends of the earth." Following that, Old Ancestor Death Knight smiled sinisterly. Then, a simple and unadorned black compass appeared in his hand. Chapter 2239. The Dead Knight Patriarch looked at the Nine Hearts Luopan in his hand and smiled coldly. He had long since sensed that Nie Tian had absorbed the power of the Nine Hearts Demon Lotus not long ago. Before the Lotus aura completely disappeared, the Nine Hearts Luopan could sense Nie Tian's location. "You're so wise, Patriarch," Yichunli said, his eyes burning with eagerness. However, Patriarch Dead Knight didn't pay any attention to him. As a thought entered his mind, he started controlling the Nine Hearts compass to locate Nie Tian. Meanwhile, in a secluded valley in the Burial Cloud Mountains, a silver-haired figure appeared. It was none other than Nie Tian. Phew! After entering the valley and making sure there was no one else around, Nie Tian let out a long breath of turbid air and relaxed a bit. Recalling what had just happened, Nie Tian couldn't help but chuckle. We finally escaped. He hadn't expected that Anya Minjia would almost fight with the Dead Knight Patriarch for him. Although he didn't have a good impression of Anya Minjia, he still admired the latter's strength of character. At this moment, Nie Tian recalled the scene of his battle with Yichenli, and he couldn't help but frown and ask, "Little fatty, don't you feel that my strength has increased by too much?" The battle just now had been won too easily, to the point where even he felt a little strange. Although Nie Tian had become an early-stage paramount god, his battle prowess seemed to have increased to a terrifying degree. He had estimated that his fight with Yi Chunli would most likely have ended in a Pyrrhic victory. But the truth was that he was far stronger than Yi Chunli. Nie Tian, that's how terrifying the Saint Aura is. Little Fat Cat's voice rang out as it chuckled. Your battle prowess should not have increased by so much. However, that sage aura will greatly improve your martial body. So your battle prowess is beyond your imagination. Nie Tian frowned, then laughed. So it's because of the Saint Aura. He had guessed the reason, but he hadn't been sure. He really did not expect that a sage aura that he could not detect at all would bring him such a huge improvement. Nie Tian, the benefits of the Saint Aura are beyond your imagination. You will slowly experience it in the future. The fat cat smiled again, but did not explain too much. Nie Tian's eyes flickered, and he couldn't help but ask, Fat, in your opinion, how does my current battle prowess compare to the peak experts of the 9 realms? Kid, you're thinking too much. However, the fat cat looked annoyed and said, You are not even as strong as Xian Zongfeng now. If I encounter an expert at the peak of the god state, I'll be lucky if I don't get killed instantly. Nie Tian's face stiffened and he was speechless. It seemed that he was too optimistic. Xian Zongfeng was considered strong among peak paramount gods, but he had yet to reach the level of a peak god state expert. There was still a gap between him and Nie Dao, Wind Flame Qianyu, and the others. Nie Tian couldn't even compare to Xian Zongfeng, let alone a peak god state expert. But after reaching the early paramount god level, he felt that his martial body was much stronger than before. Most importantly, with the weakening of the forbidden runes, the burden on his martial body was no longer as heavy as before. He was looking forward to the next time he used the Saint Aura to purify the forbidden runes. What kind of improvement would it bring him? Considering the time, Patriarch Dead Knight and the others should have left by now. I'll go back to the 1,000 Devils' Caves to take a look. Nie Tian smiled faintly as he prepared to return to the 1,000 Devils' Caves. The reason why he didn't leave the Burial Cloud Mountains right away was that he wanted to return to the 1,000 Devils' Cave. He knew that the 1,000 Devils' Caves was a huge treasure trove, and it would be a pity to leave just like that. Given his talent, he could easily enter any cave in the 6th level and below. There was no way he was going to miss out on such a precious opportunity. He was fairly certain that Patriarch Dead Knight and the others would assume that he had already left. Therefore, returning to the 1,000 Devils' Caves at this point would be completely unexpected. Are you trying to get yourself killed by going back to the 1,000 Devils' Caves now, moron? However, just as he was about to leave the valley, a clear voice suddenly echoed out, as though it were coming from the very fabric of space itself. Who's there? Nie Tian blurted, his eyes narrowing. Activating his holographic divine patterns, he sent his senses out to examine the area within 1,000 meters of him. But what surprised him was that he didn't find anything. There was no aura in the area, only deathly stillness. How is this possible? At this moment, even Little Fat Cat cried out in surprise. Judging from the voice just now, it was clearly a young woman who had spoken. In fact, she even seemed a bit mischievous. Nie Tian could sense that the woman was right next to him, yet he couldn't sense her presence at all. The fact that she was able to get so close to him without being detected proved that she was terrifying. Idiot, do you think you can find me with your perceptive ability? What a joke. Then, the clear voice rang out again. This time, it was filled with mockery and arrogance. Who are you? Show yourself. Nie Tian frowned and growled. Then, countless sword silhouettes gushed out of his body. Like a giant net, They enveloped the entire valley. If the woman was in the valley, she would have been touched by the sword silhouettes and Nie Tian would have sensed her. Normally speaking, those who lurked would only hide themselves and not truly disappear. However, at this moment, a very strange scene appeared before Nie Tian's eyes. Sword silhouettes filled every corner of the valley, yet there was nothing out of the ordinary. There was no one in the valley at all. How is this possible? This strange scene made Nie Tian's pupils constrict. He was shocked. That voice was clearly nearby, yet the person wasn't in the valley. This was too strange. Idiot, your methods are too low. You want to force me to show myself? In your dreams. Then, the clear voice rang out again, sounding even more arrogant. Nie Tian, this person is hiding in space. She has become one with space. Fat Cat came to her senses and reminded Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned when he heard Fat Cat's words. Then, his lips curled into a strange smile. Then, he smiled faintly and said in a loud voice, Miss, since you say that my methods are low, I will use another method. As soon as he finished speaking, a ball of flames appeared in his palm. It was the first demon fire, which was separated from the chaotic flame. The boundary of the universe. The boundary of the universe. A surprised voice rang out in the air, filled with unconcealable panic. Little girl, you know what's good for you. Nie Tian laughed. Then, with a thought, streams of flames surged out like thousands of fire snakes dancing in the air. The next moment, a strange scene appeared. Less than 10 meters away from Nie Tian, the flames in the air formed a clear silhouette. Huh! Nie Tian gasped in surprise when he saw the silhouette. His expression changed drastically.